Patrick Kelhi has served in the United States Army for 13 years, 10 of which were active duty. Under the 82nd Airborne Division, Mr. Kelhi served 3 deployments to Afghanistan. He is currently a staff sergeant in the United States National Guard and was called to action for protecting Los Angeles infrastructure and peaceful protesters following the George Floyd incident. All right. I'm here with Mr. Patrick Kelhi. Thank you for joining me, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So let's start off a little bit with your background in the military. So what kind of inspired you to start? And then even before that, let's just like your rank, your position, what subset of the military you were in.
Okay. I've been in the Army for 13 years. I did 10 years active duty. I've been in the Guard for 3 years now. I'm currently a staff sergeant. I'm a platoon sergeant. Actually, my unit's only right here in Fullerton with Alpha Company 1160th. But before that, I was up at Fort Irwin with 11th ACR. And before that, I was in North Carolina with the 82nd Airborne Division for 8 years. And through there, I did 3 deployments to Afghanistan. Came home safe each time. Really, as far as like joining goes, kind of like we were talking about, I have a big family of military history, right? So like my dad and my uncle, even my sister went to Iraq 3 times. So I knew it was kind of in my blood and it was something that I wanted to do. But when I was graduating high school, didn't really have a lot going on because I didn't like school. And all my buddies were getting ready to leave for college. And I was like, man, what the hell am I going to do? And I wanted to be a cop. My dad was CHP. My mom was also a dispatcher for CHP. So I was like, okay, well, that's kind of where I want to go. Can't do that at the age of 18. All right, well, Army's offering some big money right now. Let's go talk to them. Walked in on a Tuesday. I left, I think, the next Wednesday.
No shit.
Off on a 6-year enlistment. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's kind of how it started.
So did you guys have any recruiters on high school campus, or you went just by yourself to an office?
We did. During high school, it was, the recruiters came in and they tried to sell you on everything. And I went to them. I went to the spiels, if you will, the shticks. Just never really got sold on any of it because I was in high school and I was like, man, I feel like I need to be doing something else. Not that I was against it, but it was just, I feel like I can do more. Went through everything, graduated, and that semester really that summer break in between senior and the start of college, I reached out to my sister. She was actually in Iraq. I was like, hey, I'm thinking about joining, blah, blah. She was like, don't do anything. Let me get you in contact with my recruiter, the same recruiter that enlisted her. Because, we all heard the rumors, and that might have been a big deterrent during the high school spiels, right? It was like, oh, they're going to lie to you. They're going to tell you it's great, show you off all this money, these cars and whatever. Like that Family Guy episode where it's like your results may differ. It's kind of like that. I was like, all right. So she got me in touch with him, and the rest is pretty much history. I walked in on Tuesday, told him, hey, this is what I want to do. I want to be an 11 Bravo. I want to jump out of airplanes. Let's make it happen. And he made it happen. And I talk to recruiters now, and like these guys are having to like jump through hoops and the waivers that a lot of the kids have to get nowadays, even for something that's not a kid's fault. Like maybe a kid had like a shoulder issue, a shoulder injury from playing football or basketball or something like that. The kids have to get like these medical waivers now just to get enlisted into the Army. And I was lucky. I never really had any of that.
Like you didn't have any injuries, or the process was easier?
Both, right? So like I never had any injuries going through high school because I played volleyball, and I mean,
so did
let's be honest here. I didn't really.
My knees. I feel it in my knees. What position did you play?
I was a middle, and it's pretty much where they stick all the tall guys.
See, I played middle too, but I was a shorter middle in the spectrum. But
yeah,
anyhow, so
I played down here too. I played with Riptides and a couple other volleyball clubs down here.
Nice.
Back in 06.
Just
07.
constantly pivoting off that left knee, because middles especially, like you're always jumping back and just constantly turning with sticky shoes.
Mm-hmm.
I feel on my knee, but
yeah. Well, the good thing is it kept me in shape because you're always kind of running around, sprinting and things like that. So when I went to join the Army, as far as like looking at it now, like if I was a recruiter, I would be the exact person I'm trying to recruit. He's in decent shape. He hasn't been in any legal trouble. Let's get him in, get him out.
Yep.
And like, that's just essentially how it worked. But it's just not the case anymore these days because, you know, the kids these days aren't as active as we used to be. And it's no fault of their own. It's just their upbringing. And right. It's just like the way we were brought up. You know, you always remember your parents saying, it doesn't matter what generation you talk to. Every single person's parent was like, oh, you guys have it so easy these days. Right. But who constituted that? Who created that culture, right? Like you want to blame the kids because it's easy, but nobody ever wants to take a look back and be like, look at what I've cultivated. Look at like this group of kids I've created, right?
You're right.
And that's just kind of where we're at. And it's really hard to kind of keep the numbers up, right? So like maybe back in like the 90s, early 2000s, borderline about where I was joining, there was just more activity going on. There was more of the, you know, go out in the streets and play, and you got to come back in with the light when, you know, the street lights come on. Nowadays, it's not really like that anymore because everybody is so afraid to let their kids out. I have 3 daughters. I don't think I would, and I live in a pretty nice neighborhood. But letting them just go out and play until the street lights come on, it's a thing of the past.
Interesting. So is there a bottleneck right now with recruiting based on people not being in shape enough?
I don't know. I'm not a recruiter, but I have to assume. I work at the California Military Institute in Paris. It's a charter school for 5th grade to 12th graders, and it's pretty much a college preparatory school for the kids in Paris. And we have kids from other districts that want to go there because it is such a really good school. But our kids are really goal-oriented, really motivated, and ready to move on to bigger and better things. So that's what we're there to help prep them for. So my school's like a recruiter's like dream, right? Because the kids are already military oriented. They already know ranks. They already know discipline. They know all these things because they're not problem kids. They're really, really good kids. So I can't speak on the bottlenecking of where the recruiters are at right now. That's just based solely on my opinion and what I've seen
Gotcha.
from like other schools.
Just because I've heard that before. I mean, same things with police officers right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's not too much incentive, or people don't necessarily want to go serve as much as they did like when you started. Right. And like, I know you can't 100% speak on it just because you're not a recruiter, but I mean, it kind of ties in there. You got some unhealthy kids that, for one, can't pass the physical requirements, and then just maybe not so inclined. But that reminds me, did 9/11 or any of the events that happened then kind of coach you into going? Did you ever think about it? Like, I want to serve my country. And
oh yeah, everybody remembers that day, you know, especially my age bracket, which is funny because, and I'll bring it up a few more times throughout this, but it's a generational thing, right? So like, I remember 9/11, and I'm sure you probably remember the day it was going down.
It was like kindergarten, really young.
Okay, maybe you remember.
I just remember my mom flipping on the TV and being kind of like in shock.
Yeah.
But I couldn't absorb what was actually happening.
Right. And same with me, right? So like I was in 7th grade when it happened. A little bit older. So, but I had my own stuff going on. Like, all right, what's on TV? What's on Saturday morning cartoons, whatever other things 7th graders do. But I do remember it being an extremely pivotal moment in our country, in our nation, and how important it was and what happened. Because I remember I woke up, my brother came running upstairs. My family name is PJ, turn the TV on. Look what's happening. Look what's happening. I didn't really understand it until probably a few years later when I was in high school. And when these recruiters are coming through and talking about it, I was like, man, I can't believe something like that would happen in this country. Because, you know, when you're just a kid, you think rainbows and butterflies all the time. But at that time, when I was in 7th grade or you were in kindergarten, something absolutely horrendous was happening in this country. But it didn't really affect us as an individual, right? So like, just like me.
Especially as a young person too.
Right. And I didn't have anybody in the military at the time. Correction, I did. I have a cousin. He's a lieutenant colonel now. But he was in the military at the time. Didn't really talk to him much. But for somebody like that, that affected them greatly, right? So I remember when I joined, I got to my first unit, and my first team leaders and squad leaders would, where were you when 9/11 went down? Where were you? I tell them, I'm like, I was in 7th grade getting ready to go to class. Oh man, I was in the field doing another drill. They brought us all in, and everybody has their own stories. But what's crazy about it is that you can connect that day to so many other things about what happens after that, right? So like I can 100% say it did shape my future in joining the military, because I did want to go fight. I did want to go stand up for my country. But so did everybody after that. Everybody who joined after 9/11 didn't join the military expecting not to deploy. Nobody. I'd be hard pressed to find out. And I remember there was a big, like 2020 or Dateline or something like that, came out a few years afterwards, and they were going after these recruiters, saying like, oh, these guys aren't going to go to war. And like these recruiters, some of them, not all of them are good, right? With any organization, you're going to have your bad seeds. But some of these recruiters, in order to hit their numbers, were telling them like, not lies, but falsifications, essentially saying like, all right, well, you have just as likely getting into a firefight in Afghanistan as you do, walking down Compton.
No way.
While it's not a lie, it's not exactly the full truth either. So like they kind of bended it, and all these undercover people who were talking to the recruiters, like Army lies and Marines lie because Marines are doing it too. But nobody should go into joining the military not expecting to deploy.
Yeah, like the most extreme case scenario, especially following an event like that. And everyone's educated. Well, you should be, at least if you're going to join, like what the general vibe is, what's happening overseas, how many people are going.
Right. And that's with joining in general. Like, and when I say deploy, I don't even necessarily mean Iraq or Afghanistan. There's units that go to Africa, Italy. Well, we have bases in Italy, but like,
where did Josh go? Qatar?
Josh was stationed at Fort Hood. He went to Korea first. I think it was about a year or so. And he came back. He went National Guard, and he just wanted that deployment. Because for us, a lot of like the alpha type males, like all we wanted to do was gear up, grab our gun, and go deploy. Right. And I told him, because I love him so much, I was like, look, man, it's not all it's cracked up to be. Like, I've done this, 3 times already. It's not all it's cracked up to be. Yeah, there's those cool guy moments, but man, it's a lot of sitting on your ass too. Just waiting for something else to happen. Or if you're not waiting for that, you're out on patrol, just, doing what you have to do. It's not like the movies, or like we were talking about. It's not like Call of Duty,
So what was it like? Let's talk your first week in, like, training in the very beginning. So you said you went into an office on, what was it, a Tuesday or Wednesday, and then left a week later?
Oh man, the best part about that story was when I had to call my dad and tell him. My mom knew. My parents were divorced. My parents divorced when I was 4. So I was living with my mom at the time, and my dad and my stepmom were on vacation in Wyoming. And my mom knew I was going. My dad, I hadn't really been able to talk to him because he was on vacation, and I didn't want to bother him. And I call him on like that Friday or something like that. I'm getting ready to ship out on Wednesday. And I call him like, hey, Dad, guess what? He's like, what? What's going on? I'm joining the Army. I'm leaving on Wednesday. And all I hear is like tires screeching in the background. And they were up in like Wyoming going towards Deadwood. And he gets home. I was like, I'm going to kill you.
Really?
Yeah. Like, you can't scare me like that. And, but yeah, so they hurried their ass home just to see me off. So that went really good. Really, the first week when you go to basic training, it's not like the basic training videos that you see. So like the first week, I went to Fort Benning, Georgia, and the first week is all in processing, right? So you work with drill sergeants, but it's not as intense as like the real training is yet. So it's like a soft break-in. It's a lot of staying up, a lot of standing around, getting your hair cut, doing all the things. And like, it's crazy because you don't expect it to, but that really messes with some people getting their heads shaved. Cause it's a lot of people identify their hair as being part of their personality or their identity. Like, who's this big guy shaving all my hair off. Now I'm not me. But they do that to put everybody at a level playing field. Now I've never worked with women, so can't really speak on that side. I know they just have to keep their hair in a bun. But that's basically the first week. You get your uniform issued, you get your shots, your 10,000 shots. And that's funny too, because you get to see some like the biggest, like burliest guys break down and cry because they don't want to get a shot. Yeah. But that's with anything. And then after that first week, you get picked up. You get picked up from the place you just flew into. And it's just chaos, man. They load you up on this bus and you get to your little basic training site and where you're going to be living for the next, 14 weeks. And you get off the bus and just chaos ensues, man. They've planted smoke bombs, smoke grenades, spraying water, all the things you see. It's exactly what it is like when you see it on videos.
Like yelling in each other's faces.
And no matter what you do, you're not going to get anything right. They're going to give you these unbelievable time hacks. All right, guys, I'm going to say guys because I don't want to use the language that they did. But, all right, get all your bags, get all your gear. You got less than 5 minutes to get it. And there's like 100 of us with 2 bags, a rucksack, and like an assault pack or something like that with you. And that's all been loaded on a separate carrier. So you have 5 minutes to get it all sorted, get into formation. And by this time, we still don't even know what the hell a formation is yet.
Ask, you guys even know?
So they give you these impossible tasks because they need to break you down and make sure you know you're gonna fail. It's just gonna happen, but it's how you bounce back after that. Now you don't realize that at the time, right? So, like looking back on it now, I'm super appreciative of it because I know I'm gonna fail. I know I'm going to. Everybody's gonna fail. It's those people who can't seem to bounce back from it. Those are the people who struggle. Those are the people who end up failing because they can't take failure as part of their life. But you have to, because there's no way around it. If you tell me that there is one guy on this planet that's never failed at anything, anybody successful too, that's never failed at anything, I'm going to show you a liar. Yeah, he's bullshitting you, man. There's no way. Because in order to succeed in something like that, especially in combat arms, you have to be shown how to fail.
And they kind of wean out people too, just giving that to you right off the bat, setting you up for failure almost, just so they could see how you bounce back.
Right, exactly.
As soon as you step off that bus.
Because while basic training does teach you the Army values, going through it, you have to adapt to it. And some people just don't adapt to it very well. And so we, at a ratio, probably saying like, if we started with 100, I'd say probably 80 still graduated. Because it's not hard. It's do what you're told, show up on time, be in the right uniform, but still guys would still mess that up. And it's really unfortunate. Because whether they were playing most of the time it was mind games. We'd be getting, they call it smoking, and they'd smoke us for like 20 minutes, just constant push-ups, flutter kicks, exercising. A lot of guys were like, this is great, man. I'm getting paid to work out.
Yeah. So what's the fitness like? The fitness tests.
So at the fitness test at the time was 42 push-ups at a minimum, 53 sit-ups, and you had to run the 2 mile in like 18:30. I never had a problem with the running. My problem was the push-ups because I'm 6'5", my long gangly arms, so I was
lengthy.
Yeah. So the push-ups were my issue, but like it was good because you didn't show up expecting to pass, right? You didn't show up expecting to excel with colors because people failed. I failed my first PT test, but by the end of it, I passed because they break you down, they build you up, and they show you how to succeed. You don't show up and expecting to already meet the standard. Now, there are certain standards they do expect you to meet, don't lie, cheat or steal, all those great things. But as far as the physical aspect of it, it's a lot of rope climbing, it's a lot of running. And the crazy thing is, like, basic training is not even the hardest part. It's not until you get to your first unit. And I didn't believe it because the drill sergeants always tell us to be like, oh, wait till you get to your first unit. I'm like, yeah, whatever. meet little 18-year-old me. I'm like, man, I know the world. I've been in the Army for like a day, I know what's going on here. And I get to my first unit, and man, it's the biggest culture shock in the world, because in basic training, there's rules. The drill sergeants have to apply to like TRADOC rules. It's training doctrine rules. When you get to a unit and you got your first team leader, he doesn't follow any TRADOC rules. Man, I remember my first team leader / section leader, Sergeant Hughes, man, had me low crawling from one end of the hallway to the other for no reason. But it's crazy, because at the time, and this is the biggest thing with military in general, there's always going to be an outcome. There's always going to be a purpose. You may not see it at the time, but the minute you take a step back and look at it, be like, oh man, yeah, that really sucked. And I'm throwing up from how hard I worked out. But, I'm mentally stronger for it and physically stronger, because I always struggle with my push-ups. But he told me one day, he was like, every time I come into a room, drop and give me 25. I did that for like a year until he told me to stop, and started maxing my push-ups, man. So there are goals to it.
Do you remember like how many you could do in the beginning, and then after that year? Like much progress, I imagine.
My first basic training PT test, the drill sergeant looked at me, because you have to do them correctly too. You can't just like break your elbows and like that counts as one, right?
The military wants elbows in, right?
At the time it wasn't. So you could put your arms out.
Okay. Which
thank God, because if I had to do like this, my elbows would be shattered by now. But you're able to do this, and it's all the way down, all the way up. You have to make sure your arms break the plane and all that fun stuff. My drill sergeant looks at me when I get up, and he's like, man, you got some work to do. And I think I did like 12. And after the Sergeant Hughes thing, I was doing, in 2 minutes, I was doing like 72, 73 push-ups, which still isn't even very good compared to like where I was at, what unit I was in. Cause I was I was in an airborne company, light infantry with just airplanes. Everybody was jacked. Everybody had their specialty. Mine just happened to be running. I could run like a gazelle. I ended up getting my 2 mile time down to like 13 minutes flat.
Holy shit.
But I couldn't push anything. I couldn't do push-ups. So like the unit will take a look at that and kind of like put you in specialized places, right? So like in a normal light infantry company, you have 3 line squads and a weapon squad. Like you want your big brawly dudes in the weapon squad, because they're carrying the 240, the machine guns, they're carrying all the ammo for the machine guns. You want your like lighter, more agile guys on the line squad, so that way they can maneuver a little bit faster.
Interesting. Okay, so you were there at your first squadron for a year, and then so basic training was 14 weeks.
Mm-hmm. I think it ended, well, so like I went through a OSIT. It's a one station unit training. So like most of the MOSs have like basic training, and then you ship off to go to AIT. Mine was all encompassing. Mine was 22 weeks in Fort Benning infantry training school. And yeah, I got there, and I'm assuming you were going to talk about leading up to the deployment.
Yeah, just like the process from after. Who was your sergeant again?
Hughes.
Yeah. After that thing happened.
So he ended up being my leadership all the way through my entire first deployment. We were leading up to it. I got to my first unit in, I think, February of 2008, and we had a train up time all the way up until about August of 2009. And
can you define a unit just for people that don't know what you're talking about?
So a unit can like mean like different things, right? So like I was in the 82nd Airborne Division, right? So like that's a division, but it's also a unit. So like if you start at the bottom and work your way up, there's multiple echelons that you can define as a unit. It's just more of a broad term, right? So like in the Army, it starts out as a soldier, right? Like, so you're just one dude, and then you move up to a fire team, which is supposed to be 4 guys. And then you move up to a squad, which is squad leader, 2 team leaders, and then your riflemen, saw gunners, and grenadiers. That's about 9 guys. And then you move up to a platoon, which is what I have now. It should be 9, 18, 27, 36, 40, anywhere from 40 to about 42 with attachments. And then you move up to company, and that's 4 platoons. And then you move up to battalion, and that's 6 battalions at 4 platoons per company. if I said that right. But yeah, it's just huge, right? So like, I'll try and be a little bit more specific as far as like company and unit and stuff like that. So
yeah, no worries. Just so people get a grasp of, because I'm imagining like the team. You know, I've only seen this stuff on video games, which I don't hardly ever play. But
right, and a lot of people see like on TV and video games and movies, like when people hear teams, they think about these 4 or 5 man like SKTs, like small kill teams, right? But it's like when we deploy, like you're usually there as a platoon, which is about 40 guys. But we went through, you know, JRTC, which is a 3 to 4 week training exercise. It's to certify that your brigade, because we were deploying at a brigade level at that time, was ready for deployment. Go through the train up, get certified, and we go on our first deployment.
So real quick, just a timeline from when you first stepped into your first deployment. What was that?
I had a long one. A lot of guys got shorter than I did. Guys were showing up to their units and they were deploying within like weeks. Like they'd show up, they get their new fancy gear, and they were off. Me, I showed up to the 82nd, and man, we were on rear D for like rear detachment. They anytime somebody deploys, they have to leave a small footprint back in the States. And usually most of the time it's like guys with like hardship issues, medical issues that can't have them deploy. And they kind of hold down home front here. I don't really expect them to do anything, but they're what runs the unit on the backside. And unfortunately, that's also one of the hardest jobs in the Army, because anytime anybody was killed, like the rear D sergeant in charge was in charge of kind of gathering info, helping people, because most of the time they had to go do classes to be I can't even think of the name right now, basically a liaison for the family.
Doing a lot of communication, not always.
Yeah. And so like that was never a job I envied. Anytime they asked, you know, throughout the deployments, it was, all right, who wants to stay rear D? Who wants to be in charge of it? Nope. That is not something I want to do. Because not only that, but you also have to, you're in charge of all the hooligans that are left back there. Because a lot of times the guys who got left back were also troublemakers. You know, the guys who got caught smoking weed, doing all bunch of other crap they shouldn't have been doing. So you had to like have your reins on them. It's not a fun job. Most of the time, everybody's just like, yeah, I don't want to do that.
So you go through all the training, and then when you're actually, you went there on plane.
Mm-hmm.
So how long was that? And then what was the feeling like of just knowing you're going to step foot overseas?
So for a lot of us in my 40-man platoon, for a lot of us, it was our first time. We had great leadership, though. A lot of them were, you know, I'd already deployed once, some of them even twice. My platoon sergeant had been, I can't even count how many times. But we were all really, really comfortable with our leadership, because we knew they knew what they were doing. So we kind of looked to them. Like every time something else changed, like, all right, we got to look at them. But getting ready to get on the bird, you know, I'm from Southern California. We were deploying out of North Carolina. My family didn't come out. And it's kind of a hard thing to do anyways. You don't want to have your family come out for that. Like the people who did have their families, it was because it was their wife or their kids who were there. And most of us were all just single dudes, just, all right, let's go.
How old were you?
19.
Okay.
No, 20.
20.
I was 20.
So roughly like 2-ish years.
Yeah, about a year and a half from that time. So we're all getting ready to get on. So we fly an ungodly amount of hours, and we fly into Manus, which is right next to with a stop in Germany for like 2 hours. Fly to Manus. We end up staying there for like a day or two, just for more in processing and stuff like that. Because when you fly into Afghanistan, they have to have, you know, room for you, right? So I go there. By the way, best chow hall I've ever been in. It was an Air Force chow hall in Manus, and they had like midnight chow, full Snickers bars. They had dudes who would like come pick up like these your chow trays after you're done. Like we go to pick them up and go put them away. And like this Air Force like tech sergeant would walk around like, no, just leave it. Just leave it. What do you mean? You want me to leave a mess? Yeah. We got it. What the hell is going on here?
We used to clean it up after ourselves.
Yeah, because up until that point, our experience with the Air Force was we just jumped out of their aircraft, you know, because Army doesn't have airplanes. The only time we worked with Air Force was just, on the airplanes. So working with or seeing that, it's huge. Like, I was like, what the, man, I joined the wrong damn branch.
Are they all this nice?
So we were there for a couple days, and we finally fly in, and this is in the middle of August. So right in the middle of the heat. And we land in Kandahar on a C-17 with the rest of my team, with the rest of our platoon. And I step off that bird, man, and everybody's like, because in North Carolina, it's very humid, right? So a lot of guys from the South are like, oh, this is nothing, this is nothing. A lot of us from SoCal, where we deal with desert heat, we're like, oh, yeah, it'll be fine, it'll be fine. Man, I got off that damn bird, and I about died. It's like 142 degrees on the tarmac. And like you step off and like we have our boots on, and you just think like there's no way my boot's not going to melt to this blacktop right now.
Wow.
And you step off, you get off your plane, you go in, they do all these briefings. And again, you're there for probably another few days. So we're there because you have to go through like a rollover simulator, right? So like in the event that, you're driving down the road and you have a rollover, you have to go through all this training, right? And then rules of engagement briefings. And rules of engagement briefings changed almost weekly, right? Because your rules of engagement had to change. And what was crazy was my first deployment was the change between the Bush and Obama administration, right? So you could see in a lot of the ways that we had to change our TTPs, our tactics, trainings, and procedures, how much more we had to reflect the new ROEs that were coming out, right? So like it wasn't the Wild West. I got there in 2009. We'd already been there for 8 years, but I could still see like there was a little bit of it left over. But by the time the Obama administration had taken over and all these things had happened, all these things had changed, man, by the end of that deployment, it was dudes were afraid to pull their triggers because like dudes were just getting hemmed up left and right. Like it didn't matter if, I feared for my life. I was like, why'd you do it? Dudes are getting like pinned to the wall. So that's all those briefings. A little side story on that, but that's all those briefings. You're there for about 3 or 4 days, and then by the end of that 4th day, we'd gotten the call, and my squad leader wakes us up. It's like, hey, let's go. We're get your gear. We're getting loaded up. So they load us up on CH-47s, the Chinooks with the double rotors. Load us up, and we get airlifted from Kandahar into Fob Wilson out in Kandahar district in Afghanistan, and spent I think like 2 or 3 months there. Got into my first firefight there. Probably about first 3 weeks. Man, it cracked me up because looking back on it. So we're going down this route, and it's just another normal day. But all of a sudden we start hearing like over our heads. What the fuck? And like we've been training for this for 1.5, 2 years. I mean, even since basic training. And it's crazy how you don't really think you're going to react. You're like, I just know I don't want to freeze up, because I'm sure you guys have heard all those stories, like guys freezing up, not wanting to do their jobs. And I didn't have a freezing moment. My problem was I couldn't stop shooting my damn machine gun. So our lead truck was a 50 cal automatic machine gun. I had a Mark 19, which was a automatic grenade launcher. These 40 millimeter grenades that would launch, just like lob them.
And this is like on the
It's on the top mounted of the truck, yeah. And so the whole thing only lasts about 5 minutes, and I can hear my squad leader, who's in the lead truck. He commanded both trucks, but he was talking to me through it. I could hear him talking to me, but I couldn't comprehend it. Like for some reason I couldn't turn off shooting.
Wow.
And so it lasts like 5 minutes. Nobody got hurt. Nobody got injured. And funniest thing about it was we told the battalion commander, like, hey, we just got into a tick, blah, blah, blah. All right, cool. Go do a BDA, battle damage assessment. And I'm thinking in my mind, I'm like, I just destroyed these buildings. I'm firing 40 millimeter grenades and like these little mud huts. And I started looking closer. I'm like, they didn't do anything to these things. Like, man, we need to get whoever built these buildings and bring them over here. So that way,
yeah, they look like mud huts, and the grenades weren't doing nothing.
Yeah, it was like denting them. It was just nothing. But
So what was this assessment like? Who did you figure out who was firing at you? Was it
so
terrorists or locals?
So we never found out. Because what they do is, and what their TTPs were like their tactics, trainings, and procedures. What they did was they tested us. They tested us to see what we would do, right? So, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, we just laid waste to whatever the hell was around them, right? We knew there was no civilian populace around that area because obviously that's a big thing that we need to look at, especially when firing machine guns like that.
How do you guys make that assessment?
On site. Depending on it all depends on how big the threat is, and because we could have escalated it too. Like we could have pulled out our rocket launchers, we could have escalated things. But because after like that first initial contact, like the first few minutes, nothing was really going on. So we didn't need to escalate anymore. We gained fire superiority. They weren't shooting back. So we were working with the Afghan National Police. They were a partner force. So any time we left the wire, we had to have a local presence with us because we couldn't just walk around as U.S. forces. We had to be partnered with somebody. So
I think that's important for people to understand because it's not like you see these movies or play these video games and you think it's just soldiers out running amok, shooting at people. Not only do you guys have your procedures where you can't do that, like you have to make all these assessments, but you're teaming up with the local good guys per se.
Right, exactly. And local good guys, loosely termed, and we'll get into that too.
You'll have to explain that more.
But that was essentially our mission for the first 3 months, right? Was we were partnered with local national police to train them, right? So like we weren't there to fight a war, essentially. We were there to train them to take care of their own government.
Initially in the war, or when you initially got there?
When I initially got there.
09?
In middle of 09, it was still, we were doing like coin operations, counterinsurgency operations, right? So we had to partner with them and we were teaching them how we worked, how we did these things. The problem was, man, these guys loved smoking weed. These guys,
really?
We'd go on patrol, man. These dudes would be baked out of their minds. They'd have flowers in at the end of the barrels. Dudes just didn't pay attention to anything.
Probably hash.
Oh, yeah.
That's what they do, hash over there.
Yeah, and hash brownies, hash this, hash that. It's like Whoville for hash. It was bad, man.
Who wants to get stoned in the middle of like a war?
To them, though, and that's the crazy thing, is that to them, this is nothing new. To me, I'm like, you guys are fucking stupid. No, I wouldn't even have a beer right now. You're crazy. But to them, man, Afghanistan's been a roaring country for they haven't had more of a decade of peace since Alexander the Great, right? So like this is all they've known, you know, and it's a third world country. They have cell phones, but it's like the old Nokias and stuff like that, and their towers get shut down like post like 8 o'clock at night. Like it's just not a developed country. So hash is a very big thing for them, right? It's a big part of their culture. So, but we can't go in there and tell them we can advise them, hey, stop doing that because, you know, it's not safe. But to them, it's just a way of life, right? That's like coming over here and telling us to stop playing football because it's dangerous. No, fuck you. We're still going to play football.
Yeah. So you found yourself trying to teach, it's like a student, for lack of a better term, or your partner, but they're like stoned. Yeah. They're not really comprehending
and
things as sharp. They should be sharper, especially in that combat zone.
Right. And that was probably one of the biggest frustrations there, was because we had to keep teaching them the same things over and over again. And there were a lot of times, man, where they put us more in danger than the Taliban did, or the bad guys did, or the pissed off villager with an AK, because they didn't know what they were doing, or they just weren't paying attention.
On that note, real quick, the pissed off villager, did you notice there was people that wanted you there, like that almost felt you guys were protecting them and helping their country, and then on the flip side, you have people that are firing at you that don't want you there, even though you're there to help?
Right. And there was always that argument or conversation as far as, you know, is this actually Taliban, or is this just some local farmer who is tired of us walking through his fields
and has a gun?
Yeah, because everybody was allowed to have a gun. Every household there was allowed to have one rifle. So we'd find them all the time. We just couldn't do shit about it because they were allowed to have it.
How do you guys differentiate?
We don't.
Can't tell.
Well, So
imagine like the clothing and whatnot.
and that's
Taliban and the farmer might look the same in there.
That's exactly. So like the same guy that was out at 2 o'clock in the morning, we're watching on thermals, plant IEDs. It's probably going to be the same guy who's shaking your hand the next day. Oh, America's great. America's great. It's probably the same guy, but that's their psychological warfare too, right? So where we have units called PSYOP units. It's psychological operations, and it's fancy, but it's not as fancy as it sounds. So like if, the big part of it was we would go around to these local villages around us, right? So if my base is in the middle, we have these villages. So like kind of our goal was to try to talk to the village elders and try to win their hearts and minds. Hey, help us out. Kind of give us something. It was a give and take, right? So we would build schools, we would build wells, we would do all these things, and we would give them all this money, like carrying bags of cash, just to try to help the community. The problem was some of them were playing both sides. Some of them, like, they would take our money, but then go sell us out to the Americans were here, whatever. The problem was the good village elders who were all for us being there and taking our help. Towards the end of my first deployment, what they did was they started sending out those SKTs, like three dudes on a fucking Haji Davidson roll up to this village elder's door, knock on it. Dude opened his door and blasted him.
So they started identifying who was working with the Americans and just whacking them.
Right, exactly.
Wow.
And so what that created was a huge issue for us, right? Because who's going to talk to us now?
Got it.
Would you talk to me?
That makes sense.
I wouldn't.
God, it's almost like a losing battle from the beginning. So
and that's a big reason why it's gone on for so long. In my opinion, I'm not by no means am I an expert, but it's just frustrating to see we make a little progress and then we take like 20 steps back, because the second that dude gets killed and the Taliban or the Haqqani network or whoever does these things, man, it just gets stripped away because nobody's going to talk to us anymore.
I mean, that's a variable that's almost out of your control. Like, so I'm sure there's a language barrier at times, and
we had Terps with us, but I mean, most of the time we had really good Terps, but I know I was talking to a couple other guys in different companies or different platoons and stuff like that. Some of their Terps were like, they'd talk to me like, man, I'm pretty sure that dude's working with the Taliban, and like telling them when we're going out, because we would have we'd have patrol schedules, right? So like we had to be out for like 8 hours a day, which not every unit had this. And this was a big issue for us, was because like our battalion command team at the time was like, you guys have to be out for 8 hours a day. Doing what? Like there was no task or purpose. Like they told us like, make one up, go do humanitarian aid, go do these things, go do route reconnaissance, but for 8 hours. And like our battle space was only a certain size. And like at some point or another, they didn't even have to guess our movements, because they just knew within the next 24 hours we're going to be in probably relatively close to the same area.
Did you guys switch up your routes ever to avoid
we had to
being set up? And
so like anytime you go out, so if I'm going from A to B, I'm never going to take that straight line more than once, right? So like if I go from A to B and I take that straight line, I'm going to take zigzag on the way back, because you don't want them, because you'll go and they'll probably just fall in behind you. And that's just historic, like tactics 101.
Yeah.
You never go back the same way you came.
Was there ever an event where you felt like you guys were going into an ambush or?
Yeah. It never happened, but and this is kind of goes back to training, right? And why training is so important is because you look at the definition of a battle drill, right? So like the Army infantry, all we do is concentrate on battle drills, right? But a battle drill is a collective action rapidly executed without applying a deliberate decision-making process, right? So what does that mean in layman's term? Muscle memory. It means if something pops off, you already know exactly what you're doing. And I remember we were walking back one night, and it was like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And you got to remember, like most of these people in the middle of the summer, they have to do all their work at nighttime. Nobody wants to be out farming at 130-degree heat. That sucks. And I remember we were walking down this alleyway, and I was a SAUG gunner. I had a machine gun with me, and we had our NVGs on, and I see this like dark movement come walk across the street. And they shouldn't be out walking around really not shifty like that. And you can tell like who's being shifty and shady and who's just out walking around farming their plants or vegetables, whatever have you. And the dude sprinted across the street. And I remember my team leader saying, "Hey, let's go." And the second he said, "Let's go," the next thing I remember is coming to in my mind. And we were inside of a compound with a bunch of women and children with my rifle up and looking, scanning the room. I was like, what the fuck just happened? But they talk about this a lot too in training, is that eventually your instincts are just going to end up taking over, right? You're going to practice something for so long, it's just going to come second nature. So the second he said, "Let's go," I blacked. We breached a door. We went in, scanning the room. Nothing happened. But I just remember coming to with my team leader, like shaking my arm. Like, "Hey, let's go. We're done."
Is that a common thing with?
I've talked to a couple buddies, and they've experienced something similar. It's more so the first few times it happens, right? And I was probably 5 or 6 months into it, and that was my biggest like eye opener. Like, holy shit, all this Army preaching actually works, because it did. I did exactly what I was supposed to do. I didn't even have to think about it. The problem with that is, and they had a big issue with this when a lot like the OIF-1, OEF-1 guys, the original invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan guys, were coming back and being cops. Cops would go in and just blast everybody, because that's essentially what we were training for. We were doing target acquisition, but it wasn't as concentrated, right? So like we weren't being taught to disseminate between certain targets. We did the training, but it wasn't as heavily, emphasized. So once that happened, when I joined, we started doing it more and more, because we had to differentiate between a bad guy and a good guy. Just like those posters with the guy holding the girl. Sometimes it's a gun, sometimes it's a banana, but that's really what the Army started concentrating on after Iraq and Afghanistan.
So under Bush, I mean, just given being closer to the event, I bet leaders and people training soldiers were a little bit more riled up, and I don't want to say angry, but anyhow, is that coming top down? I know you weren't actually in before 2008, but under the Bush administration, like you just described, they were going in and kind of just firing on.
Yeah.
Is that a top down like policy, like leaders kind of?
No. So it's different everywhere, right? So from top down, so the president gives your left and right limits, right? So, the Joint Chiefs of Staff and, whoever else, all the senior leadership will start disseminating even lower and lower and lower. And by the time it gets to like a company level, like the 4 platoons, your left and right limits are just kind of, they are what they are. So, and it's all depending on where you're at, because they do that. So the same TTPs that we had, the same procedures that we had, probably didn't apply to somebody in, say, in Iraq, right? Because Iraq was a little bit more built up. It was a little bit more, a little bit more built up. Whereas for us, it was just crap everywhere. It was desert, it was desert farmlands. And we were in the Arghandab River Valley for the last part of my first deployment. And there was like lush fields, there was rivers, but like on the other side is dust. So like you couldn't really have just one operating procedure. Kind of had to change with each unit. So, and that's the way it kind of goes.
Gotcha. Because the only reason I asked is like the blacking out thing to me. I know you said that sometimes that it's more common in the beginning, and then I'm sure you get used to it and can kind of control your thought process. But, a soldier blacking out in the middle of a firefight, even though, let's say your autopilot's working and you're executing the job properly, it's still just like a scary idea on the surface,
Right. And that's kind of why I brought it up, because it is a scary moment, especially for, what if I did pull the trigger? How the hell am I going to recollect what exactly I did? How is the report going to be filed? I don't fucking remember.
Yeah.
I don't know. Next thing I remember, I woke up and not woke up, because I was there physically. I was obviously doing the things, going through the motions, but I just couldn't recollect how I got into that damn room. And that's part of the scary part of it, was that how the hell am I going to recollect this to anybody? Not that I've had that conversation with a few people, and they're like, yeah, man, it's happened a lot. So it does happen to a few people, and it might just be part of those, getting those kinks out, But
so
yeah,
this is this event at night when you end up in the building with women and children. How far in was that?
that was probably about halfway through. So, like I was saying, like the first 3 months of that deployment was Afghan partnership, right?
Yep.
So something happened with our battalion commander. There was a big shtick about it, but I don't remember enough. But we weren't battle space owners. We were occupying a battle space, but we didn't have our own. And our battalion commander really wanted our own, from what I've been told. So like 3 months into it, come like that December, we get our own battle space, and this battle space is the Arghandab River Valley. It was a Stryker unit was there prior. Stryker's the big tank looking things, right? And they were just getting hemmed up. They're getting tore up from the floor up. They couldn't handle it. They couldn't own the battle space anymore because the space itself, you couldn't thrive in a situation like that with armor, right? With armored vehicles, because they're just too big, and we walked everywhere.
Because you were saying they're getting hit with what are
IEDs.
IEDs.
So, and like one of the stories, I guess like during our RIP process, like these, excuse language, but these assholes had like planted such a huge bomb that, and this was before V-shaped holes, like one of the bombs had like blown up and smashed the bottom of a Stryker straight through with people in the back. So vehicles weren't really a thing that could continue to operate there. So we took over this environment. And for the next, what is it? I left in like August of that year, August or September. And it was just foot patrol after foot patrol after foot patrol. Bunch of IEDs, found a bunch. I know one of the platoons in my company, they were at a schoolhouse and they would go to sleep, even with guards out, and would wake up and they were surrounded by IEDs. Like, so these assholes were coming in at night or whenever they were doing it, and they were still able to plant these bombs around their little base.
Holy shit.
Yeah. And so it was a much more kinetic area where we ended up at, because where we were at, it was a nice little area. But when we moved, it was a huge eye opener. We built our own FOB, and essentially a FOB, it's a forward operating base. It's just a base, like a small checkpoint, right, to where you can work at. And it started with 4 trucks in a circle. And by the time we left, it was probably about the size of probably a grocery store, like plot wise, right? And we had my platoon and the headquarters element of that company. So it's like the first sergeant, the commander, and then the Afghan National Police actually lived on the base with us. And a big part of that is, so we go through the whole thing. We get into a few firefights, quite a few. And towards the end of the deployment, our military decides to move this ANCOP, or what was it? The Afghan National Special Forces, essentially, right? So the Afghan National Special Forces end up moving into our base with these local national police. Afghans are very territorial about where they live and who's in their area. We didn't take any indirect fire, meaning like mortars coming in, the entire time we were there. In the first week or first few weeks or something like that, they moved in, started taking indirect fire almost immediately. So like these local national police are seeing this and like, what do you mean you're telling us we can't protect our own people? Fuck you. We don't want you guys here anyways. We don't want you Americans. And it became very, it wasn't as smooth as it was before. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Because
it is a partnership, because we are operating in their land. And I remember it was one night somebody else was out on patrol. It was our turn down. And my squad leader, somebody like busts in the tent, like, hey, second squad got attacked. And they come back and they told us the report. They were like, we swear that it was one of the local police that initiated this attack. They were like walking down this like alleyway, and like some dude poked his head out, and like one of the dudes was like, hey, is that so-and-so? And then all next thing you know is like an RPG coming down the damn alleyway.
Holy shit.
And like we're like, okay, what the hell? Like, cause we're trying to help them. We're not there to ruin their lives, but you can only lead a horse to water. You ain't going to make them drink it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the consensus with a lot of them.
So your original goal there was the partnership with the local police to like help train them and whatnot. So now when you guys have this grocery store size front, what is that still your main goal, or like what is the goal of occupying this area?
It's still the same goal, is still partner with their local national police force, because they lived with us. They had another one up on like a riverbed. They had a few others, around, and it was kind of our mission, just kind of go around and coach and train all these guys, all while still, fighting our own battles, with the IEDs, with, this small arms fire. Our battalion talk kept taking rockets over and over again. Like one day we were across, because the Arghandab River Valley, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's just a river valley. But on the other side of the river, we had a few companies. And throughout this, 6-7 month period, whatever it might be, by the end of it, my battalion ended up having the most, it's not a good record, most medevacs, right? So dudes losing their legs, losing their arms, all these things. And that's just the kind of area we were in. Because so much of it was, we wanted to partner with the Afghan National Police, or the ANA, or the Afghan National Army. But it was so hard because it seemed like there was double crossing going on. And it's kind of all encompassing. It's frustrating.
So when you guys are there occupying and you're trying, like the goal is to partner to better train them so they can defend their own land from terrorists, is that?
Yeah, but they don't need it. They don't want it.
They don't want it. Do they actually not need it, or are we supplying them?
They need it.
Are we supplying them with any weapons ever?
So
at least like in your experience when you're there,
the weapons they have, they're all AKs, right? So they're all AK-47 Russians. The reason they have, you remember that movie War Dogs with Jonah Hill and whatever his name, that big ammo deal that went south because they sold them a bunch of Chinese ammo.
I don't know if I've seen that movie. I'm familiar with the firearms and whatnot.
They sold the U.S. like a crap ton of these like Chinese 7.62, I think by 45 rounds, but it wasn't supposed to be Chinese. So like, because they're crap ammo. And so the Afghans had these during like the early 90s, and they just stuck with it. We didn't supply them weapons, but we did supply them with, like if we went to do like humanitarian aid, we would bring them some food, we would bring them school supplies, we would give them all these things. But for the most part, we were trying to get them to help themselves, right? So we would show them the guidelines on how to do these things, and they would kind of go off on their own, right? And it was the same thing with like certain patrols. We would have them lead their own patrols. By about halfway through, we were like, get in the back. We just have them stand in the back and walk with us and like have our little partnerships.
Did you ever have any like personal experience delivering these school supplies and like maybe seeing a familiar face, a woman, a child?
Well, and that was the cool thing, was because we were in the same spot for so long, we did get to grow personal relationships within these villages and within these people. And it was really cool. But it's just one of those things that you have to keep on the back of your mind. Like, you don't give them any personal information. You don't want to do any of this, because some of the kids were really cool. Some of the kids are assholes. Because I remember in a different company or something like that, or maybe it was somebody was telling me a story, like one of the kids like stolen a pair of Nods, the night vision goggles, out of their cases, and like they had to buy it back. Like the guy who lost them had to buy it back from the kid for like $50. But the kids will like wow. They'll grab, like if they see pins in your uniform, they'll take the pins and they'll do all. They're good kids, but it's part of who they are. So they try
something shiny.
Yeah, exactly. Ooh, piece of candy, right? So working with the kids was really good. You didn't really get a lot of female interaction, right? And that's part of the Afghan culture. When we would go to these villages, we would have to go to the village elder, because we had to have good correspondence with them, right? So make sure they know we're on their good side. Hey, we want to build you a school. We want to build you a well. Sorry, build you a water. Build you a well. But everything kind of came with an asterisk on it. Hey, we want to help you, but you don't have to, but we would really like some intel. Where's so-and-so operating, we're so-and-so doing this. And a lot of the times they didn't have it, or they played out like they didn't have it. So we built it anyways, because, we weren't going to fault them if they didn't know. But probably I'd say about 90% of it, they did know where they were at.
I wonder if that's because they dislike the idea of helping out like a foreign country on their land more so than ratting out like the bad terrorists who are still on their land, but they're kind of one of the same. It's so, because I'm trying to like what their perspective is when we're there occupying the land, trying to give them school supplies and just show them our way of life per se, and then help train their soldiers and whatnot.
Right.
But to think of like the conversations happening in one of those dirt huts, or with grandpa to grandson or granddaughter, just the ideologies of having, like, what if that was outside just here in Anaheim, it's just strange. I'm trying to like picture it.
Well, and that's because that's who they are as a people. Like when I was saying, they've been a roaring country. It's not that they can't evolve. They're kind of stagnant. It's just what they've been, because either they've been forced to, when the Soviets invaded, and then we were there, and it's just who they are as a people, because they are very ideological, right? So family is everything to them. Their last name is everything to them. They betrayed us because they wanted to protect their own. They're very centric focused in that aspect.
So getting that experience and seeing how this culture lives and thrives, and did it ever like make you reflect on how lucky we are as Americans, just with our upbringing? And
absolutely, it's night and day, man. And you see those kids, and you see like the teenagers, and you see some of the women, and you see how happy they are. But you look at somebody like us, take a normal 22-year-old kid, go put him over there, he ain't smiling. So it's a very big matter of perspective, and going over there, seeing those things and doing those things, it's huge, because it gives you a big piece of reality of what's really important here, right? So I don't get mad at certain things, because it's just, it doesn't matter, right? There are people, that age-old saying, there's people in Africa who are starving or whatever, but like, that's true, man. So like, that doesn't necessarily mean it has to apply to a dinner table, but there are people out there that go without and are completely fine. Why am I going to cry over spilt milk when the guy over there can't even afford milk? It's huge.
So you were saying though, like the majority of them were actually happy?
Yeah, because in my mind, most of it was because they did want to progress. They did want to move, but there was still a big number of those people that just wanted to stay the same. They didn't want to go anywhere. They're stagnant. They didn't want to go. So to our faces, very happy. Oh, thank you for the pins. Thank you for the paper. Thank you for the food. I think we stopped bringing candy out at one point because it just turned into a ravage fight. Like the kids started fighting each other. We're like, this is not what we're trying to do here.
What kind of candy did you bring them?
Just like Tootsie Rolls and stuff like that. Or sunflower seeds is a big thing, because we would get like care packages from home, right? And a lot of this stuff we just didn't end up eating or whatever. It just kind of got left over. So we would bring, sunflower seeds, Tootsie Rolls. My dad sent me a crap ton of like Laffy Taffy. So I'd or saltwater taffy. So I'd bring some of that out, and they knew like when, tall white guy came, all right, he's got the taffy, I'm going to go after him. So we kind of stopped doing that, because eventually like it got really hard to do our jobs. Cause like, while we did go in there and talk to these people, that's probably a 10-man patrol. 2 people are probably talking to the village elder. The other 8 are surrounding the area, securing it. Right. So like, it's cool to hang out with the kids, but at the same time, you're handing out candy. You're kind of like, your head's on a swivel at all times.
I imagine it always is.
Yeah.
Like, because I haven't been there, but I can only imagine, no matter, like, you got to always be on your toes. You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So that first deployment, what was like the biggest thing that stood out to you, whether it was a firefight, just the craziest thing you experienced on your first one?
Craziest thing. So I remember we would have to go to CAF, which is Kandahar Airfield, like for our big resupply. And this one just kind of messed with me because it was more mentally odd. We were driving back, and we were driving through this village, and we see a body on the other, like on that side of the road. And it was just kind of, it was weird because it didn't look like a normal body. Well, we stopped because we're there to help. We didn't have any national police with us, so we were just supposed to go resupply and come back. And I'm up in my turret, and I pull my binoculars out, and I start looking, and it's moving. So whatever it is, it's alive. And it was almost simultaneous because the second I looked through my binoculars, I realized it's a kid. And somebody came over the radio. It's just a kid. It's just a kid. Not to say like, oh my God, leave it alone. It's just a kid, whatever. But it's a kid. And I remember, because I have like nieces and nephews and all these things, and like seeing that kid just thrashed on the ground. But we found out later, we medevaced him. I think he ended up making it. They didn't really get any big after reports, but it was one of those things we found out after the fact that apparently somebody in the village was talking to us, or not necessarily my unit, but like a different unit. So we don't even know if he was Taliban or if we're pretty sure he was, but just ended up mowing this kid down. No reason. Just crushed him. This like 8-year-old kid. What did that 8-year-old kid do? You think that 8-year-old kid gave intel to the U.S. military? No, but that showed how weak they were.
Just the savageness.
They were willing to, because they didn't want to, deal with the adults or do something like that. And maybe that's just how I'm saying this in my mind. But it's like, you took your frustrations out on a child. And his uncle had to come with us, and his uncle was actually blind, which was kind of weird because we had to load him up in our Max Pros. And his blind uncle's in there. He's trying to talk to us, and he doesn't speak English. And all I'm thinking is that like that might be one of the only times that man thinks he's lucky to be blind, because he doesn't have to see his nephew sitting there on the ground mangled.
Jesus.
And
how did you guys locate the uncle?
We saw the kid when they saw us stop, because nobody was around the kid. Nobody was over there or anything like that.
Did anyone think you guys potentially did it?
So, not that I know of, maybe, but I was up in the turret. But when we stopped, all the villagers kind of came out, because when we stop, everybody wants to come out and see, oh, military's here. And, yeah, it was just, they came out. Somebody went and grabbed the uncle, because everybody knows everybody in these villages. So got him, loaded him up. We had to take him back to our base. They medevaced him, and they flew him out from there. But yeah, that was like one of the more like mental, because a lot of it is the mental issues that you go through in deployment, right? So like physically pulling a trigger isn't that hard, right? But mentally, the process you have to go through getting ready to pull it, knowing that you're probably going to take somebody's life if you're a decent shot, that's more of the struggle, right? It's like when people ask me some like those stories, those are more what I lean to, right? And like, just like me, I was a big family kid before I left for the military. I loved my cousins. I loved hanging out with my family, Christmases, Thanksgiving, all those things. They're great. I loved them. The biggest problem I had was when I left for not only basic, but like deployments and trainings and things like that, was that time never stops, right? So like when I left, time didn't stop for me, right? Like, so you still had families going on. You still had your friends from high school. Their life is still moving on, and you're missing every part of it. And it wasn't like it is now with social media, with Instagram and Facebook. Like I think I had a MySpace at the time, but during that, you didn't see what was going on. So you missed so much, throughout my 3 deployments. I think I've missed, a handful of funerals. I've missed every birth of my nieces or nephews. And not only from deployments, but from being on the other side of the country too. So like for somebody like me who is really into their family, like that's a big struggle. Like time goes on, man. You're not going to stop it. You're not important. You're not that important. And understanding I'm not that important, but it's just, that's something that a lot of people have to go through. It's like, and that's part of that mental strength that you do gain. Because now I don't really get affected by much on the mental side of things.
Well, that's good, 'cause like you came out of it with mental strength and whatever worked for you or tools over time. That on the flip side, I'm sure you've heard of the exact opposite happening: people being broken or going through real trauma and PTSD.
Well, I didn't come out of it like that. I've struggled for probably since my first deployment, even my second deployment. Constantly struggling with it, and everybody does. Everybody that I've known, that we've gone through, it's an issue as far as like mental rigidity, right? Because you keep having to do the same thing over and over again. You get numb to it, right? But what happens when you don't have to anymore? And you start thinking about all those things. And the Army prepares you to do those physical acts. At the time, they didn't really prepare you for what happens when you come back, right? So, like after that first deployment, right? So when we come back, we have to go through all this medical screening. We have to go through all these checkups and things like that to make sure we're still okay, physically and mentally. The problem was, and I still have a problem with it to this day, is that they would line you up company by company, which is about 100-something dudes, in line to see 2 providers. So 50 guys per line on a Friday afternoon after you just came back from a 12, 13-month deployment. And you have to go talk to a stranger about what you saw or did. Now, on one aspect, yeah, you have that ability to talk to them, but do you really want to be that asshole that holds up the line to get the guys, to keep the guys from getting released at, 5 o'clock in the afternoon so they can go drink during the weekend? No, but that's the way it was, right? So like even after all that, or whatever I saw, first, second, or third, it was kind of the same way. I didn't end up getting help until after my second deployment, because not only through the stressors of combat and stuff like that, I'd gone through a divorce on my second deployment, and I came back, man, and I was drinking a 5th of Captain Morgan a night because I couldn't drink whiskey because I'm a girl. And realizing that I did need mental help. So I ended up getting some PTSD counseling after that, because I knew I needed it, right? My command, they saw it and they were like, all right, go get you the help. But the way that the Army was dealing with it at the time, having, those 2 or 3 guys sitting in line and you not wanting to hold up the line and do all these things, it's not healthy, right? And, me personally, it should be like commander directed, right? So like the commander of my company, all right, so I know this platoon was involved in this, or I know this squad was involved in this. Like, you need to go I want you to go talk to somebody. I want you to go do all these things. And the Army tried doing it. They did like these after deployment, like adventure quest things. Like, so we went to the Olympic Training Center in North Carolina in Charlotte. Great time, for like 8 hours. You got off a day of work. You get to go do all these things. And it's like the resiliency thing. Like, all right, so this is how you bounce back. This is how you get better. Man, dudes ain't listening to that.
Seems kind of like a Band-Aid, for mental help.
Right. Especially
after seeing combat, I imagine it's a long process daily.
And there are dudes way worse off than I am, from the things I've seen and what I've done, even in those 3 deployments. I know dudes way worse, way less, but they still have worse issues, right? Because not everybody's the same thing. And the Army loves that you're a soldier, right? You're a pump. But what they don't really look at is what kind of person you are, right? And it's the same thing now, even training like new privates now, right? Like in my platoon that just got out of basic training, it's like, I can't raise them the same way I was raised in the Army, because it's not the same. It's not the same military, right? And it was the same thing when I was in. Unfortunately, some people just don't see those generational differences. You know, I got kids coming in now. I have an 18-year-old kid in my platoon. He wasn't even alive during 9/11. You know, he was born in like 2001. Like that, so that kid has nothing to do with 9/11. Now, am I going to be the same asshole that makes fun of him and yells at him for not being born when 9/11 was around? No, that's terrible. I'm not going to hold over somebody's birthday over their head because they weren't around when something was going down.
Yeah.
Like I was like berated for it. Like, dude, I joined as soon as I could. Like, why am I being like minusculed like to the bottom because I wasn't born 5 years earlier? You know, and it was a lot of it is guys trying to, you know, puff up their chest. Mm-hmm. But like the best leaders I've always had in the Army, the best ones, they never had to talk about any of that stuff because it didn't matter to them. It did matter to them, but they didn't need to impress me. They didn't need to try to show these things to me to try to prove a point that I'm the alpha, because they knew they were. All those, like all the different kinds and the different kind of leaders, you take with the good from the good ones and you leave the bad ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Just with people in general, I try to live my life like that too. I mean, people aren't perfect. Pick and choose like good traits that you want to keep with you, but that's good to hear though that there were Army leaders that had an effect on you that weren't just super brash, but actually.
Yeah, and there's more of those guys than there are bad, because just like I said earlier, with any organization, there's bad apples, there's bad seeds. Those guys generally don't tend to last very long or get too high. What I will say though, what is, as far as like looking at leadership and like how people get taken care of in the military, what I will say is that the difference between active duty and National Guard is night and day. And you might think, oh, active duty is way better because it's all they do, but you'd be wrong. The National Guard, every single senior leader I've had above me has been as good, if not better, than the best leadership I had on the active side. Because what happens is that the leaders on the National Guard side, they have jobs on the outside. And a lot of people make fun of that, like, oh, I got to go to the grocery store and then, you know, go do the weekend warrior thing. But a lot of them are in management positions. Like right now, you know, my first sergeant's LAPD. You know, my sergeant major is LAPD. So you have more human interaction outside of the military. These senior leaders on the active duty side, and I was one of them, they don't know anything else. They joined when they were 18 and they stuck with it long enough, and that's where they're at. Like me, when I got out after 10 years of the active duty side. I got out and I was like, the fuck am I doing? Because I didn't know how to operate on a civilian level.
And I want to get to that because I've actually spoken to your cousin Josh about it too. Mm-hmm. But okay, so when your first deployment is done, when do you decide that you're going to go back for a second time?
The Army decided that for me.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
how does that work?
So during my time, it was you didn't really have a choice. If your unit came down on orders, your brigade, right? If your brigade came down on orders for a deployment, you were going. Now, that's where you had a lot of those guys. Like, you remember that movie Stop Loss? Guys would go AWOL. I'm not going. I don't want to go. You know, I've already done my time. So it killed a lot of guys. Not literally, but like killed their spirits.
Like they didn't want to go back.
Right. They didn't want to go back.
Jesus.
I wanted to go back. But when I came back from my first deployment, I met my soon-to-be ex-wife. We got married. She had a daughter. But I still wanted to deploy. So we deploy. That deployment was damn near almost where the first part of my last one was, near Fob Wilson. That was a lot of bureaucracy going on. So at the time, this was in 2012, we were trying to eradicate poppy fields, right? Because that's how they did their heroin. That's how they did. But that's one of their sources of income. That's one of their sources of, of life, right? So we started offering cash to take all these poppy fields, and the villagers just hated it. They hated us because we're taking away a source of life for them, right? Because they probably didn't do the heroin. They chopped it up and sold it, right? And like you've seen the pictures of like vets and stuff like that near like the hash plants, the weed plants, and all the poppy fields and stuff like that. But they weren't having it. right? And we got more pushback because of that. So there were even more IEDs on my second deployment
Jesus.
than there were on the first one. Wasn't as kinetic, wasn't as many small arm firefights or anything like that. I know I didn't even get no one that second deployment. It was only a 7-month deployment. The first one was 12, then 7, and then 9. But my second one, I didn't even pull my trigger one time outside the wire. We went out every day. It was hot as balls every day, but we just got more pushback. It didn't feel, and it may have been a regional thing too, because we were more towards located a more well-established village, whereas the Arghandab River Valley was just like
very like farmland, just rural.
So the second one, we just got more pushback. So we got more pushback. We got more IEDs.
And the main goal was literally to eradicate poppy fields because of heroin.
Not the main goal, but that was one of the big ones that stuck out to me. You got to realize
gotcha.
like that was still 8 years ago. So I can't, I'm still trying to remember, the point was we were still doing counterinsurgency operations. So we were still partnering with the Afghan National Police. We were still doing all those same things and going on patrol with them. It was just, it was less eventful because they didn't care as much, right? So like that first deployment where they didn't care a lot because they were so sure of themselves that they could take care of it. They pushed, it was harder to work with them.
They didn't want to work with you guys at all.
Right.
And this is the people or the
locals?
National Guard?
Well, actually both. The National Police and
National
the
Police.
locals, right? And, that's why they just smoked hash, ate it, and just did off and did whatever the hell they were going to do. And then the second deployment, it just didn't really seem like they cared at all. I'm like, all right, you're here. Let's go.
So they just ignore you guys?
Yeah, there was an apathy about it that was just, it wasn't ignoring. It's really hard to describe.
So, what was the day, like the day-to-day there on the second one?
The day-to-day one was a little bit more regimented, right? So the first one, we'd go out all kinds of hours, all kinds of days. The second one, we had to have A&P forces, and it's just what we did. We also had to do like RNS patrols at night. A lot of walking around.
You said there was more IEDs. Were you guys scanning some on foot?
My company didn't see as many. Well, let me rephrase that. My company did. My platoon in that certain area did not. But like when I say like our areas, it's a difference between like here and like a block away. So like while I didn't necessarily in my platoon see as much, like second platoon down the street, I think ended up digging up like 100 and something different IEDs.
Oh, interesting. So you're on that small plot of land.
Mm-hmm.
What percentage at the time of your 7 months there?
Oh, the whole time.
The entire time.
Yeah.
Wow.
So like when we moved in on that second deployment, it was, we had probably, I guess it's kind of hard to say, but probably about like 10, 12 city blocks from going from south to north on the, or north to south on the south side of Highway 1. Highway 1 is just it's the only improved road in Afghanistan, and it just rings the entire country.
Wow.
And we were on like the southern tip, and everything was just south of it. Ironically, the Arghandab River was just at the end of our area of operation, but it was like, here's where we were at the second deployment. We were all the way like bumfuck Egypt over here, the first one. So like seeing that river and seeing that water again, I'm like, fuck you.
So even though it was less eventful, good and bad from the first deployment, does anything stick out from the second one?
No, that second one was a lot more like about halfway through. It was like, all right, I'm done. Let's go home. And then, my divorce happened.
Besides that, so I'm sorry to hear that, but you're in a good place now, huh?
Yeah. So what ended up happening was, another dude in our unit got into a firefight and got killed. What ended up happening was she was listed as his fiance. She got $400,000 and took off. And like the Army Times reported it as, Staff Sergeant, I can't remember his name right now, dead, leaves behind his fiance, her, and her daughter.
Oh, wow.
And ended up divorcing. Actually, it worked out really well because we were already kind of splitting. But like looking back on it, I'm like, that bitch was cheating on me the whole time.
Holy crap.
But hindsight's 20/20.
Yeah, of course.
So, and that's part of like when I came back and, going through that, like that's when I knew I needed mental health because that's when I started drinking a lot. And, cause that's stressful for anybody. I knew it was a bad relationship, but it still sucks, cause I went because in the Army, even as an E5, you live in the barracks. Like I was a sergeant living in the barracks, and I was like, man, my life sucks. This is, I went on 2 deployments, come back 22, 23 at the time. And I'm already divorced, living in the barracks. But where there's darkness, there's light. I ended up, we got divorced that September and started talking to my wife that December.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Congrats to that.
Thank you.
So, what was that process like, seeking mental help, and if there's any like tangible things that stuck out to you that helped break your addiction for one, and then just prepped you maybe for that third time going back?
Having something to put your effort towards, right? Other than trying to kill that bottle, I found that, actually rekindling my romance with not rekindling, but starting to talk with my now wife, it really helped me because I was able to talk to her about certain things, and I was able to I didn't want to make it seem like I was a crazy person, obviously, but just being able to have somebody to talk to, even like as much as I really didn't know her, it was still nice to be able to talk to somebody else. I was still seeing a counselor, and that's nice. And a lot of guys have like these negative connotations with talking to people who don't really know what you went through, right? The stigma is like, I don't want to go talk to somebody who doesn't know what I've been through. They weren't there. You're right, dude. But 9 times out of 10, most people aren't going to understand, and it's just something we kind of have to all fight through. And I fight with it every day. And I know people who do it every day, but being able to have that outlet, being able to talk to somebody, I know now a lot of my buddies are still, they talk to each other, and we all talk to each other. We have Facebook groups. We vent there. So really, like, a lot of it is venting. A lot of it does fix that. I've recently got it into woodworking. But as far as like back then, dude, it's just talking, being able to talk to somebody and like explain your side of things, and just having that open ear that's willing to listen to you and say, all right, yeah, that's pretty fucked up, but don't beat yourself up too bad about it, because you're going to bounce back. And I did, and then went on that 3rd deployment, and me and my girlfriend at the time, she was from here, from Southern California. We actually went to the same high school, but she was in the hot cheerleader club, but I wasn't. So
Nice.
She'd been married once, had 2 kids, and I'd been married once, and so we were at a tie. But yeah, and then went on that 3rd deployment was a big a lot different than the other 2.
What was the gap in time between 2 and 3?
The gap between, I guess 1 and 2 was 12 months. 15 months. Between 2 and 3 was, I got back in September and I left December the next year. So whatever that math is, about 14 months or so.
Yeah, roughly.
About 14 months, but in between each time, do the big train up, do the big things. But the difference was, for this 3rd deployment, was we weren't going into it doing partnership missions with the ANP or the ANA. We were going back to Afghanistan, but we were going back to do Guardian Angel missions. Meaning we were going over there to protect like VIPs, generals, dignitaries, whoever ends up coming in. That's what we end up doing, right? so it was a big difference in like, wait, what do you mean I'm not going over there just to, go look for trouble necessarily? But I'll say it was a little bit easier, not mentally, but physically prepping for it. The training cycles leading up to it weren't as intense. We weren't doing patrol-based operations in the bottom of a swamp for 48 hours at a time. It was more vehicle operations and stuff like that, understanding traffic patterns and stuff like that, getting ready for that deployment. When we got there, it was...
Where was the location?
That deployment, we were in Kabul. We were in one of the biggest cities. And up until I think it was like the 60s, it's like one of the most thriving cities in the world. But then again, something happened and it just started. And one of the trippiest things about Kabul was that we were driving down one day down the road and I saw a fish market in the middle of Kabul in a landlocked country. And we drove by it and we're just, hell no. And I'm from California.
Waiting to happen.
Right. And like, I'm from California. I like sushi and I was living in North Carolina. And I was like, you know what? I gotta go for some sushi right now. Hell no. Well, there's no way I was willing to give that even a single shot. But yeah, it was nice to be able to see more of the infrastructure of the city. So we ended up doing Guardian Angel missions for, I think probably about the first month or so. And about that time into it, we were under the Georgia National Guard. So like our active duty 82nd Airborne unit ended up under the command of the Georgia National Guard, and they needed a QRF team. QRF is a quick reaction force. Like if something happens, you have to go. Like as soon as it happens, you have to be out the gate in like less than 10 minutes. So we end up going to, I think that place it's this little cop in the middle of the city on top of a hilltop. And we were located next to like this old rundown castle. And that was the cool thing about Afghanistan was like, there's like a lot of history there. And it was nice to be able to see. I'm not too big of a book nerd, obviously, but being able to see these things and like people who did know what was there and seeing these castles, like, oh, this is where Alexander the Great was. It was really nice and cool because there is some rich history there. But we ended up being on this QRF team, and we did that for about 6 months all the way to the end of the deployment. And that was really interesting because a lot of the times we spent just sitting around not doing anything. Obviously, we're always training. We had a little pistol range on the back. We always used to go out and shoot and train, but we couldn't leave without authorization, right? We had to have a certain reason for leaving the gate, and that was if something bad was happening most of the time, unless it was like resupplies or we were going out to check checkpoints, because there was a certain amount of checkpoints around the city. So like our secondary mission was to go around and check on the operations of these checkpoints of all these vehicles coming into the city, checking with the national police and checking with the national army, whereas we weren't necessarily as partnered with them as we were the previous two deployments. It was just like that was part of our mission, was just to make sure that they were up and operational. We tried getting like x-ray machines out there. We had one guy who knew how to operate it. We would bring him out there. He's one of our guys, but man, like our guy would get it up and running, and like the next time we go out there, like, it's broken. I don't know how to fix it. I'm like, what are we doing?
That reminds me real quick. So the budgeting that goes into your guys' operations and whatnot, I've heard that based on the administration, sometimes budget's like really limited. And then I like when Trump was in office, a lot of different facets of the military, like were excited knowing that they were going to get backed and funding. And then, I think it was on the Rogan podcast, one of his guests he had on, like ordered a really fancy espresso machine, just because sometimes there's like so much money.
Surplus.
Yeah, and you can just kind of do with it. Did you ever experience that from 1, 2 to 3?
We did. So especially like I talked about with that first deployment, right, leading up to it, all the training cycles leading up to it, man, we were on ranges day in and day out. And like that sounds fun, but it gets a little exhausting towards the end because we had so much ammo because we had the money to use. So it was great because we had all this trigger time. We were able to get guys behind rifles. We were able to, just get rounds down range and get trigger time. Come second deployment, Obama administration, not necessarily anything against him, maybe just the way the budget worked out, but we were struggling. We were struggling to get ammo, just to get dudes qualified in certain weapon systems, certain training environments, and even certain trips, like any like military exercises we had to go do somewhere else. Like, because we would go to like Fort Pickett in Virginia, AP Hill, Fort Polk. We went to Fort Irwin, and you could just kind of tell the money was a little bit tighter during that. And since then, since Trump has taken over, we have the money to use it for the ability that we need it for, right? We have, if we want to go take the guys out to a shooting range or schedule these ranges, it's been a lot easier because we have that allocation for, ammunition or food or just training in general. And I think that's a big part of it, right? Because a lot of guys or a lot of people are just, Trump's a warmonger, or, Obama, this, Obama that. Like, man, like when you're in it, like it doesn't really affect you in day to day, except for what you see as the big picture, as far as the money goes and, stuff like that. But it didn't really matter. You just saw it, well, this training cycle, we're kind of limited on funds, but, you couldn't really point a finger at, one or the other.
Gotcha. So your second deployment was 2012, right?
Yeah.
And then your third one, let's get back to that. So you're on a hill.
Yeah, that was.
And you could only leave if you guys have a good reason to. There's got to be like trouble brewing.
Yeah.
What year is that?
That was December 2013 to December 2000, or not December. I got back in like August of 2014.
Gotcha.
And yeah, that's basically what we were doing. We were going around checking these checkpoints, going out if something happened, like if an explosion happened, we would go out, check it out. But 9 times out of 10, actually 10 times out of 10, every time the local Afghan, detectives, police, whatever have you, ended up having jurisdiction. So they just took over. We were just there to kind of help and assist whatever they really needed.
Do you think that was because it was a more built up like city and infrastructure with better police, or is it just like what we were doing over there was actually helping from your first to your third? Maybe a little bit of both.
Probably a little bit of both. That's a good question. I think it was the environment that we were in, and really our mission set. It wasn't there weren't as many like local pissed off farmers.
Gotcha.
In Kabul, right? So there weren't as pop shots this and pop shots that. You still had them because dudes are getting married, husband, brother-in-law, whatever, shoots off a clip of AK ammo in the air. We'd have to go out and investigate.
Oh, interesting.
But that's just their culture.
Yeah.
So we'd show up, we'd see a wedding, we're like, all right, book it up, time to go home.
Do you know if anyone ever dies from that stuff coming back down? Because I've seen so many videos of that.
Not that I know of, or not that I saw.
Gotta happen.
But I gotta go somewhere. I'm just lucky enough it wasn't anywhere near us.
So that was a pretty calm
deployment. One of the trippiest things, it really tripped us up. And it wasn't just me, it was everybody. So you can look it up. I think it was July or June. Like we were getting ready to go home. There was an explosion at a hospital in downtown Kabul.
Greg, can you check out that event? So that would have been...
It was a husband and son.
So you said the date, though, it was I
think June or April, May or June.
So hospital explosion 2014 Kabul.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was this father-son chiropractor. And we have the internet now at that time in our little talk area. And we're like reading these reports like, what the fuck? Like we're in this area. Like why haven't we gotten any of this? And like there's already news reports. Like I'm seeing pictures of this guy on like Yahoo News. And I was like, what? We were confused. And like we're reading this guy's bio. There's this son. There's this husband and son that went over to Kabul to like help practice in the hospital and things like that. And this bombing went off and we're seeing these guys' pictures. And we show up and they're like, all right, so we got 2 bodies and we need to go pick them up and transport them to the Kabul International Airport. And it's crazy because you see this guy's image on a computer screen and then you go to pick up his body. Like, I already know this guy's bio. Like, I already know everything about him, like what he was doing. Not, obviously I didn't remember it, but you see all these things and you go, and like I was lead truck and we parked, and like next thing I remember, I see this, my medic bagging him up and bringing him out. And I'm like, man, that's the craziest thing I've ever experienced, is like to read this guy's like bio about an attack he was just in that we didn't even know about yet, but we had to go pick up his body, and we had to go take him, and they took care of everything else past that. But it was wild to be able to see that, like see something like that happen, unfold in your eye. And like, this is that at this time in 2014, social media is a much more prevalent thing. Right. So like, it was crazy. Like, we would be riding in our trucks and we have these computers in them, and we would get like intel, like updates and things like that. And one day we were riding around and I get a message, I open it up, it says Twitter info, possible attack in Kabul or Kabul city limits and blah, blah, blah. And I call my commander at the time, my PL. I was like, hey, did you just get a message about something from Twitter? He's like, yeah, I got it too. I thought that was kind of weird. We got back. We're like, so we're getting our intel updates from Twitter now.
Wow.
But they had it at the time in that city. Like those in Kabul, it was so much more built up. They had smartphones. They had that technology. When you look back at when I first went there in 2009, they barely had those little Nokias that played Snake. But it's crazy to see the change, not only in location, but time as well.
Did you guys ever like actually apply that intel to operations?
There are
social media.
There are jobs specifically for that. And that is way too smart for me to even think about. But like we did get intel from things like that. And like when we would see reports of like possible bombings or possible that terrorist threats, we would be on more high alert, right? So like we would have different levels. Some days we were walking around in PTs. Most of the time we were in our uniform and our kit was ready to go in the truck. Like at a drop of a hat, we had to go. And I think my platoon sergeant PL, we were like, because there was only 2 squads. It was me and a weapons squad. And like we just had to be ready to go at all times. So it was very much more controlled with just our 2 small squads, 2 9-man squads.
Wow. Did you guys ever find out what caused that hospital explosion?
Some asshole.
Just
some guy. I'm sure there was some kind of deeper seated meaning, but it was, it was just, they found out somebody was there trying to help. And that's just that was the Haikini network at the time too. So it was a much more specific group of individuals that had control of that area. So they didn't appreciate anybody trying to help.
I see. So oftentimes the local national force or whatever, they were handling things. You guys were just the backbone in case you really needed you.
And because the individuals that passed away were American, we were the ones that had to handle it. So
I missed that. They were American. Yeah. It was an American chiropractor.
Yeah. So the Afghan National Police secured the area, but we had to handle the remains.
Wow. Dang, that sucks. I wonder if the motive just him being an American and
Probably.
They're trying to help out.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate. That sucks. But the thing I talked to Josh about in depth, I remember when he came back and it was the transition where he decided to go to the National Guard. And I want to know what your experience is with it. So when you are a young man like that and you get put into a situation where it's literally life and death sometimes, and that breeds a certain level of partnership with your peers and just a feeling of what you're doing it really matters at certain points. It's literally life and death. And I remember Josh reiterating that he came back and adjusting to civilian life for him was really hard because he's on like the 91 freeway going to a desk job, and it wasn't doing it for him. Like I think he was like certain levels of depression and just feeling off, like feeling that he's missing that camaraderie of being in the service and being overseas. And that's ultimately what led him to go back and join the National Guard. So did you, like, from 1 to 2 to 3, I'm sure there was growth periods, but did you ever like long for that feeling of like, shit, I'm on the 55 or the 91 like freeway right now? It doesn't hit the same.
Yeah, and just like Josh will tell you too, like the only way you get through a lot of those hard times in the Army is being with the boys, right? And I guess that's what the kids are saying nowadays. But like having that camaraderie and going through the suck with other people. You know, they say misery loves its company, right? It's the same thing. Man, nobody likes to suck at life alone. And when you're sucking at life, living in, you know, a swamp, it's a lot easier to get through it when you have people who are like-minded individuals who go through it with you. So when I got out in September of 2017. I had already decided that I wanted to go to the National Guard because I knew I couldn't just let it go, right? Because I'd been doing this for a decade and I'd put so much of me into it, but I didn't want it to be who I was for the rest of my life. So I wanted to kind of do the part-time thing and see how it went. But I got out and went to go be a tower climber with Mostech. Great job. Loved it. The week I got out of the Army, I found out my wife was pregnant with my first daughter. And that job required a lot of travel. So I did that for, probably 9 or 10 months. And a lot of those guys in that industry, tower climbers and stuff like that, a lot of them are vets, and a lot of them are more specific MOS towards that skill. 11 Bravos don't have a lot going on the outside. Most of the time, it's like they make jokes like you're either going to be security or you're going to end up being being law enforcement. Just wasn't in the cards for me at the time. So I was like, you know what? Fort Irwin was offering this vocational school that you could do. I think it was like 6 weeks. It takes a part of your GI Bill, and you learn how to climb towers, work on the like the wind farms going out towards Palm Springs.
Oh yeah.
The problem is like the jobs, just you have to travel. And part of the reason I came back to California from North Carolina was to be with my wife and my fiance at the time, but my wife, and she has 2 daughters. So when I got out, found out we were pregnant, I was like, man, I'm not gonna be able to stick with this. So I stuck with it for probably about a few months. I think like to the month after my daughter was born, I left because I couldn't travel anymore. I was missing so much. And sorry.
You're good.
But like throughout that year, I was in the National Guard. I was doing the 1 week in a month, the 2 weeks a year. We went to Hawaii that year, did some good training. But the National Guard is that little like dose, that little dose that you need to kind of get your fix for like being with the guys, because there is such a camaraderie and such a brotherhood in there that it kind of hones you, kind of levels you back out. Whereas, I was a squad leader, platoon sergeant, whatever have you, in the National Guard. On the outside, I was just a dude, man. I was just a guy climbing a tower. But that's what makes the National Guard so great. It's because you have these people who are humble, who understand what it's like to live day to day as a person, not just a soldier. So like there are expectation managements, right? So like when I came from active duty, I was like, these guys are all fat, they're all, out of shape and blah, blah, blah. But it's just not the case, and that's a big thing for a lot of veterans too, is when a lot of guys get off active duty, like, I'm not going to go to the National Guard. I'm done with this stuff. Like, it's not as bad as it sounds. And I'm not pitching because I ain't a recruiter.
But it sounds like the fact of the matter for you is you have to have a little fix of, from being 18 to, 28? You said it was almost 10 years. Those are such growth years, not even just biologically. Like your brain doesn't stop till 26.
Right.
That's what they say for males. And like you're almost becoming and breeding yourself to be this person. You can't just let that go and become like a completely 100% normal civilian. You got to get a little bit of that fixed, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Is that pretty common with soldiers and military at large? Maybe if you become a cop, you still get a little bit of...
And that's a big thing, because I still keep in touch with guys who got out and, you know, they say they miss it. They, you know, they miss being with the guys and doing all those things. And like a lot of them get out and become extremely successful. And they still to this day say how much they miss it because it's a part of who you are now. Like you don't want to make it be who you are for the rest of your life, but it is who you are and what you did. Right. So, I knew when I was getting out, and they give you the briefings, you know, when you hit about that 6-month mark before you get ready to get out, you have to go through these briefings. Sometimes it's long, arduous, and just plain out boring sometimes, but you have to go through them because there's knowledge in there that you can extract from it that you didn't necessarily know about, like VA benefits, vocational rehab, all these other things and programs and opportunities that are afforded to you. But a lot of guys don't pay attention to it. And they end up getting out and they're like, the Army didn't prepare me for any of this. This sucks. There is so much there that a lot of guys just don't pay attention to it because they're so ready to get out. Because while the Army's great working with your buddies, being in the Army sucks because, you know, for a lot of people, because you have to wake up at 5:30. You don't have your own room because every morning my ass is knocking on your door to check your room, or there's another sergeant or whatever have you. You are very micromanaged. Like the dudes can't even have toasters in their rooms. That was probably one of the hardest things about being a leader was having to enforce certain rules that I didn't necessarily agree with. Like, you mean to tell me this kid signed up to go to war, deploy, but he can't have a toaster? Oh, well, it's not his building. It's the Army's building. Got it. But like, let the dude have a toaster so he doesn't have to, you know, or a George Foreman grill. Like,
but to my understanding, that's very much so how it works, right? The military, it's top down. Like, even if you don't agree with it, there's situations where if you're going to stay alive or if the system's going to work, you have to do what your superior says, you know?
Right.
Is that very much the case?
And like, look at the LA riots. Like we were talking about, we got sent down there, and it's one of those things where a lot of people didn't agree with us being down there. A lot of us, not necessarily me or any one individual, but like a lot of people just didn't like being there because they thought, because we were being berated and like kind of like puppeteered to be like this, like these bad dudes who are there to like make sure you don't do anything. Like, dude, we're just here to help you guys. But like these people in these peaceful protests were like berate us and like call us baby killers. And like, I remember we were at the steps of City Hall, and sorry.
No, you're good.
And I can remember one of the kids, it was like a 19-year-old kid on the other side of the fence, was yelling at one of my guys, and my guy, Gallman at the time, he's big, brawly dude, doesn't need a rifle to whoop your ass, doesn't need a lot to whoop your ass, but this kid is just berating him and like holding the fish out for him, like, you take that rifle off, I'm gonna fuck you up, I'm gonna kill you, and just like getting barraged by it. But like, you just want to tell him, like, I'm not the bad guy here, guys. I'm just making sure you guys are safe. Like, we're here to make sure the infrastructures are safe, and like that was our mission. But like, we're not here to hurt you. Yeah. We're just here to make sure you guys are safe. Like, why?
You're trying to keep the law and order, and it's so sad because not only to these peaceful protesters, and then you have a subset of them that are acting that way. They don't know your guys' backstory. They don't know all the overseas. They don't know all the things that you've done for your country. But then on the flip side, what is it like when you see someone that poorly represents, like, let's say the National Guard, whether it's someone that like knocked over that grandpa who like smacked his head, and you know, it's just like the vast majority of people are good, and then you have these little videos that go viral, which in fact sometimes there's wrongdoing. Is it kind of like, shit, like, that's not me, like, that's not why I wasn't there, but one guy who did his job improperly or didn't make the best decision possible makes the whole look bad, even though it shouldn't be that way. Like you've referenced multiple times, in any organization, in any business, there's, let's say, bad apples, but then there's people who make poor decisions too. Right. But when it's a poor decision that makes a grandpa crack his head open or take someone's life, whether it's in law enforcement or whatever, I mean, there's so many different angles that go into it. But how does it make you feel like?
So I think with a lot of those things too, because I like looking at things from both sides, right? Especially when the Black Lives Matter movement started, and you know, the Blue Lives Matter and all that stuff. Like, and when I see those videos, it's on both sides, right? So was that, because I think it was a cop. It may have been a National Guardsman, whoever
I'm not sure.
That pushed that elderly gentleman and cracked his head open. That was wrong, right? It's not a statement of an organization. If he was LAPD, do you think that that's the LAPD statement? We push old people and crack their heads open?
No, it's the individual.
Right, exactly. So, but when you join an organization like that, with like the LAPD or the National Guard or the Army, your individual movements speak for that group, right? But just like on the opposite side, with those peaceful protesters, dudes were beating the shit out of people. Dude, there was an ice bomb at the steps of the right where we were at LAPD headquarters. They placed an ice bomb right there. Do you think that I go around thinking that Black Lives Matter or whatever group was there, like that was their statement? No, because you have to look analytically at things and understand that there are those individuals and there are going to be bad things about each group, right? So
that needs to be said. That's like super refreshing. A lot of people need to hear that coming from a soldier like yourself, because it's important to realize that those individuals who make poor decisions or do something brash that ends up hurting somebody, it doesn't represent the entire whole. Yeah. But on the flip side, like you said, when you assume that uniform, when you assume that badge, you got to realize you are representing the whole. So it's like people like to make the argument that like those peaceful protesters, the citizens, have less accountability more so than that's your profession, you know? Right. Which has some like weight to it. I think there's certain levels of truth to that. But at the end of the day, if someone does make a mistake with the badge on, you got to realize that's an individual. And maybe there's some sort of like corruption, or it's a top-down level in that specific department where the leadership might be poor. But still, that's still a subset of the entire like entity, you know?
Right.
And it's just important, like you said, to be analytical and not just jump to conclusions. That bomb that was planted does not represent BLM.
Right.
Those crazy people that are rioting does not represent like all the rioters and peaceful protesters, you know?
Right. And like 3 nights after that, man, we were sitting on like on the corner of like First and whatever. Some dude walks up to me, and we had the communications building, the whole city blocked off. So like one dude like every 30 feet or whatever. So we were kind of like spread out. But I was on the corner, and this elderly gentleman approaches me and like tries to hand me a wad of cash. Sir, I can't take that. I'm sorry. I'm not here for that. I'm just here for you guys. He's like, just take the cash. Just take the cash. I'm like, nah, man, I'm sorry. I can't. What he ends up doing is he grabs this bag that was in his hand. And I couldn't see because it was dark out. It smashes me over the left side of my head. And luckily, I have 2 plates and 13, or I had 2 plates and 13 screws in there. I had facial reconstruction surgery, and it was all numb, so I didn't feel it. But I shove him off of me, and I raise my rifle. I'm getting ready to shoot him. Not get ready to, but I'm ready for the next step. I'm like, hey, drop the bag, because he had a backpack. Drop the bag. Drop the fucking bag. And I had my medic and my RTO with me, yelling the same thing at him. And he's pretending to reach in a bag like he's getting ready to grab something. And I'm like, there's no fucking way this is happening. And there's like huge protest less than a block away. And I'm like, I know if I fire this bullet, it's just going to be all over here. So my selector switches off, I'm getting ready to fire. And all of a sudden, I start seeing these lights around me. Everybody started pulling their phones out and started taking video. I was like, there's no fucking way I'm going to make this dude a martyr and make me be the bad guy. Luckily, the dude was reaching, but like out of the corner of my eye, I'm getting ready to reach for our radio because we had LAPD radios with us. There's a black and white in the intersection right here. I'm like, hey, come get this dude. Fucking dude bolts down the street. I'm not chasing him because I'm in full armor and everything. Like, and they got a car, so they go after him. Come to find out, the guy had a kind of bear mace and a taser in his bag. And what ended up being a wad of cash ended up being like over $1,000. So this individual, in the midst of all of this, not only tried to bait me to kill him, but also was trying to spark something bigger than he is, right? The message that the peaceful protesters, because there were not peaceful protesters there too, was trying to be conveyed. And then there's this asshole who's trying to turn away from everything that they stood for by trying to get shot and trying to make us look bad. Like me, I'm not me. I'm part of an organization when I operate like that. Those cops, they know that they are not them. They operate as part of their organization because they're not only that individual, but they're a liaison for whatever that department is, LAPD, LASD, whatever have you. Are there bad cops? Yeah, sure, probably, but there are also bad protesters, right? So to be so, I don't know, so one-sided about everything, and that's what hurts me, is like when I see people who say like, it has to be this way, it can't be the other way. All cops are crooked. Not all cops are crooked. And that's not just because my dad was a cop. Like I've had great, run-ins with law enforcement, bad run-ins with law enforcement, but it has to be more than just one-sided.
No, absolutely. And just to play devil's advocate, they, like, you operated, I would say, like in the best manner in that moment. You actually were physically harmed, didn't know what was going to be pulled out of a bag, like analyzed the situation and didn't pull the trigger. And that's because you were trained to think a certain way. Let's say if it was some asshole who was acting exactly like him, who was in that position of power, might have pulled the trigger, But with just everything that you've been through, you made your best judgment, which probably ended up being the best one, because who knows what fucking happened after that. But there's something to be said for that. But more importantly, like you said, I think it's important for each sides to call out assholes on both sides. So if you're in a department and it's 9 cops and one of them's bad out of 10, like the 9 should be like, yeah, and he's an asshole. And I get it's hard because there's brotherhood and there's obviously women and stuff in there too, but no one wants to be a rat, blah, blah, blah. But then on the flip side too, peaceful protesters call out their assholes, Yeah. Because everyone needs to be held accountable. And even though there's these systems that are treated on, like you representing your belief system or the LAPD, for example, I think the best way to solve these problems, and it's even in the court of law, you could bring it up to so many different levels, is you hold people on an individual account. Like, it's not all cops are bad. This was a bad cop in this situation. And then, of course, statistically, you try to analyze where wrongdoings are happening more often than they should be. And they're like, okay, maybe there's something wrong with this system here that we need to address top down, like leadership or whatever. But if we can like come to an agreement on just like how nice humans should act and treat one another, there's so many different things that we would actually agree on, left or right, blue, green, it doesn't matter what like color you are. It's just, let's hold individuals accountable. So you can be an asshole white person. You can be an asshole African-American, Hispanic. It doesn't matter. It's just, no. We're just trying to pinpoint assholes.
Right.
Like, that's it.
When I think a big part of that too is like humans in general flock together, right? People like being in groups. Most people, right? You look at, cities and structures and like organizations. It's because people like being around other people, right? So they generally try to be with like-minded individuals, and there's always going to be conflict in that. So when you look at like those groups you're talking about for like law enforcement, when you look at groups like the peaceful protesters for Black Lives Matter, look at the percentages too, right? So you look at, say 1,000 peaceful protesters, right? And they did an amazing job, by the way. Like during those protests, like there were those guys who were trying to get a little squirrely, and like the peaceful protesters were like, no, get him the fuck out of here. Like he's not part of us. Like he's not part of that. So they policed up their own individuals.
That's awesome.
Right? But apply that to law enforcement. Do you think the common people would be okay with law enforcement policing up their own individuals?
I think so.
What, do you? And it's okay if you do.
No, yeah, I think that's the only way you solve the problem. So like just to go back to that example of there's 10 police officers, 9 of them are good, one of them's being a dick.
Right.
And he has a record, let's say, of a certain level of activity with citizens. I think that I think people would get behind those officers like, hey, hold your assholes accountable too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because we don't want assholes with guns.
Yeah.
Like, that makes sense.
Well,
But
yeah.
on the flip side, so you don't think
No,
that people
I think they do, but I think because of the world we live in right now, a bigger example needs to be made about that, because police corruption has been a big issue since ever.
Yeah.
Right?
100%.
Fair to say. So I think now it's gotten to the point where it's gotten over the boiling point where like law enforcement doesn't have that ability anymore. And I want them to. I want them to have that ability to be able to police up their own. But because there's been a history of it, I just don't think the American people are going to be okay with it. I think nowadays, most people want to see an example made out of somebody like, who's the cop who did
took George Floyd?
Yeah. Was it Zimmerman?
No, Zimmerman was, I'm drawing a blank on his name. Grant, you look it up. It's been a couple months since I thought about it.
But so
was
the
the
George Floyd murder, right? So like
case.
if that was huge, you could almost say it was like the powder keg, right? Like the shot that was heard around the world when that cop did what he did.
There it is, Derek. What was it, Cavan?
Yeah, that guy, Derek Cavan, right? So that guy, remember when he got released, he was like publicly shamed for being released. And because whatever police department was doing their own internal investigation, people hated the fact that he was still able to walk free.
Did he end up walking free?
Not walking free, but like he was in a Walmart and some lady ended up like
I thought he was
videotaping or
getting
something like that.
convicted.
He probably is now. I'm not sure, but I remember like shortly after that, like, he bonded out and like people just like destroyed him because of what he did. And when you look at video like that or a tape like that, what a lot of people don't understand is like, that's just how they're taught, right? So a lot of law enforcement agencies since George Floyd have taken away that practice, right? The kneeling on the neck. But a lot of people just don't understand how that works. And like the same thing with like, a lot of people say, you know, if somebody's breaking into your house, why don't you just shoot them in the leg? When you get into high intensity situations like that, or law enforcement officers pretty much live there, right? You lose the ability to like have those fine motor skills and like really concentrate on things like that. Just like I was talking about when I had to go into that building, right? Yeah. It's not all there. So you can't expect somebody to be able to just maim somebody. And honestly, if somebody was assaulting me, do you think I'd rather maim them and make them live in pain for the rest of their life, or just get it done? I don't want to hurt anybody, but if you're trying to take my life, I'm going to take yours first.
Yeah.
I don't want to maim you because not only that dude's going to live in pain that until somebody shows up or whatever have you, he's going to be in pain until that happens. Like, bro, if you think whatever I have, if you think you want it more than me and I happen to best you or whatever, I'm not going to maim you because I don't want you to live in pain.
That's one way of looking at it. I would understand that perspective. But you brought it full circle for me because when you were talking about your, you didn't call it blackout. What was it? When you came to in the building, I was thinking of how many times does that happen within law enforcement?
Right.
Not only because a consistent variable in that equation would be everyone's human.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say they have a firearm and they're in a stressful situation. And then on top of that, you went through more training, correct me if I'm wrong, than that police officer did, correct?
It's a different kind of training. So like the law enforcement officers to this day go through extensive amounts of like individual one-on-one training, like dealing with individuals, right? So like somebody coming out them, they know how to unholster their pistol a lot faster. They know how to handle more close encounter scenarios than that. Their training is just different than ours, right? So like I'm not trained to, you know, go into a house and break up a domestic fight, right? But they are, because they go through those training scenarios. And just like with me, like I knew how to kick in a door and go into a building, but I don't know how to go in and break up a domestic fight like a law enforcement officer does.
So it's different. So yeah, that's 100%. That could be claimed. Training's totally different.
Mm-hmm.
And we've all felt, or at least I have, when you get that adrenaline rush, sometimes you go into autopilot mode and you're just doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So a police officer who's in that situation, even with all their training, but has a weapon on them, and let's take out the fact that person who broke the law or whatever they were doing to, let's say, deserve it or not deserve it. Let's just remove that from the equation. But just the process when it starts, that they get that adrenaline dump and you're almost in autopilot mode.
Mm-hmm.
That there's going to be a level of variance there, I think, for mistakes to be made. And that's super sad. Like, you need to do everything you can to prevent a poor decision to be made with a deadly weapon. But like you said, they're living in an environment of you're on 7 out of 10, 20, like all the time. I've used that example before. I mean, why like a traffic stop kind of gets my heart pumping. It always has, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But that cop is going up to, let's say it's at night and you're in a tinted car. And if you don't roll down the window and put your hands on, like, I try to make their lives as easy as possible because I know just by virtue of their job, they're already on a 7 out of 10, you
Right.
know?
But there are people out there who aren't as understanding or not even say necessarily respectful as you are, right?
They almost want to fight them back, off the bat.
Because you understand it. And I think it has a lot to do with how people are raised and how people are brought up with their views on policing, right? Like, my dad was a cop. Of course, I'm going to be supportive. But that doesn't always happen either. So, like, in that instance, right, in a traffic stop, like, a lot of individuals will just, they are pissed off they're being pulled over because they're on their way home and they don't want to have to deal with a speeding ticket. That cop that pulled you over is just doing his job and making sure the roads are safe. Now, and a lot of people say, oh, it's a cop out or they're trying to meet quotas. I don't know. But, like, bro, if you're doing 80 and a 60 in the slow lane or whatever lane, if you're doing 80 and a 60, why are you so pissed off you're getting a ticket?
Yeah.
Just, bro, like, you knew you messed up. Anytime I've been yelled at and messed up, I've never, like, argued, like, oh, I shouldn't be in trouble. Why? Oh, well, I guess I did it. But, like, and you see a lot of these body cam footages of, like, these dudes that are just, like, constantly arguing with the cops and, like, arguing with whoever it might be about, like, lady or person. Like, you got caught, man. Just own it. If you're willing to do the crime, like, bro, just own it. Don't make it any shittier, any harder on yourself by, you know, I'm not going to comply. I'm not going to comply with this. And then when the cop tries to reach out, you claim assault.
Yeah.
And by no means is this me saying, like, oh, just follow the law. Just follow the law. Like, no, make it easier on yourself. If you're respectful to the dude who's on his, like, if you're respectful to the cop who's probably on his 10th hour of a 12-hour shift, just wants to get home, he's probably going to take it easy on you, man. Like,
and I think these situations coexist amongst each other too. And not only that, the vast majority is going to be a peaceful encounter where that person was speeding and hopefully doesn't speed again. But then, and those people that don't act like that and want to be dicks and give pushback. And then on the flip side, even though I think it's a very much lower rate, they're just genuine assholes, bad apples that happen to be in uniform. That sometimes, whether it's profiling or you're in a higher crime area, let's say grandpa was racist and your dad was, and you have trickle-down effects of that. That exists. These all are existing amongst each other, you know? And I think in problem solving, you brought up the idea and thinking about it a little bit more, that you're right. And I don't think the vast majority of people are going to trust the cops to kind of police themselves, you know? And I mean, what do you think about maybe getting some sort of regulatory body at like a federal level to where there's still individual state policing where they have their policy and customized based on what, like, their areas that they're experts in, but maybe just like a general, like, terms of service of like how cops should be trained, like increasing the training hours that go into it. And keep also in mind that means defunding the police is exactly opposite of what you should do. You can, like, better allocate money, like in any business model.
Right.
So if you think we're spending too much money on these ARs with these scopes that we don't need, or We don't need these fancy of like cars, or shift some of that money to better training. However you want to cut it. If the people don't trust the cops to police themselves, then maybe we could develop some sort of body which is better prepares our law enforcement to make better decisions in times of high stress, you know?
Mm-hmm. So you're saying like there's a governing body above like, you know, the headquarters of LAPD, right? Because they already have their own internal affairs, like internal investigation
For
guys,
sure,
right?
yeah.
But sometimes it doesn't work. But what you're suggesting is something to the effect of like an outside agency.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's not affiliated with LAPD, right?
Correct.
Using LAPD as an example, obviously. The problem with it is, and I think you got to break it down to the core level, is like they are police officers or somebody that's entrusted with a badge and a gun, right? So they have a certain level of let's see here. People expect certain things from them, right? And when you try bringing outside agencies into something like that, I don't know if it would work, because I still don't know if that would appease anybody. And look, like you were talking about the amount of hours training and stuff like that. I'm not a cop. This is just me going off of my military background and my hundreds of hours or whatever with weapons and
similar structures, you know.
It's not. But see, that's the thing, is a lot of people think it's really similar, but it's not, man. It's like night and day. We were working with these cops, and it's just not. It's not very similar in training aspects, right? So people look at a uniform and a badge, similar respect, right? But what cops have to deal with compared to what we have to deal with, it's two different things. What I don't have an answer on how, like, we get pushed through, you know, the corruption and like cops being assholes and cops being, you know, murderers or whatever have you. But I just know that as a whole, law enforcement officers aren't all bad guys. That's why they're law enforcement officers. Just like military guys, like all the dudes that get brought up on war crimes, it's not as prevalent because guess what? It doesn't get brought up as much, right? It happens. I don't know about any of them firsthand account, but we've seen it happen. But it's just more prevalent on the law enforcement side because everybody over here has cameras. Everybody has videos. Yeah. Everybody has Ring doorbells or whatever have you. So it's just much more of a brighter or a broader subject for people nowadays.
It's the perspective too. I was talking to my mom about this a couple of weeks ago. The difference between how a citizen treats a firefighter to a cop, even though it's similar in the sense of like even where your budgeting's coming from and you're playing a crucial part in a society and taking care of the people within it. But on one hand, you have someone that has to pull people over. They have to use their firearms sometimes with deadly force. They're a regulatory body where almost every experience, just by virtue of their job, it's almost a negative encounter, you know? Like you call the cops when you're in trouble. And even though you call the firefighters when you're in trouble too, but they're always like the heroes, you know, just by virtue of their job. They're there as a savior.
Yeah.
And like when you just break it down with comparing those two, the perspective over like time that's going to be built is night and day. And that's unfortunate. And I think another, like going back to a potential solution, and God, by no means am I an expert with all the budgeting with the police or truly how to solve the problem. I just think some sort of body that leaves enough variance within like that state and that department for them to like concentrate on what they know to be the most prevalent issues in their communities. Because Joe Schmo and a headquarters in like DC that's running reports or sending down regulations doesn't know what LAPD exactly needs, you know? So I think there's a way to work that out. But just like a base level of service, you know, just maybe allocating more funds to try to wean out crooked cops or produce more training hours. And if we are able to produce the funds for it, I see it as a win-win. Like,
Right.
I'm trying to think of, I think it's like once, I'm trying to remember the source. I think it might have been on the Joe Rogan podcast, but with the amount of training that goes into actually being a cop, it's not as much as you would need. Like it's heavily in the beginning, and then once you're dumped out in the streets, I mean, you're kind of training just by going through the paces.
It's on the job training.
Yeah, you don't, like, you're not refreshing those skills year after year, you know, and coming back to headquarters. And
well, you have to look at,
I'm sure they are a little bit, but
you have to look at location too, right? So you think like a law enforcement officer, you know, down in Compton is going to have the same social skills or have the same set of skills that an officer in like Oceanside has.
ask that again.
So do you think the same type of law enforcement officer, same or two similar guys just graduated the academy? Do you think after 2 years, the guy working Compton is going to have the same set of skills that the guy working Oceanside has?
Oh, absolutely no. He's got more
because there's
more
difference
action
in location, right?
Mhm.
And like that's just where they're at. So the problem is when you try to have a governing body over something like that, it has to be so specific to a certain area that it almost becomes micromanaging, right? Especially at that level, you know, so like LAPD or LASD in that one particular area. But the problem then becomes is like you were talking about funding, right? How are we going to fund these people? But do we have the funds to allocate for something like that when there's such a big push to defund the police? Now, I don't know what's going on with LAPD or LASD as far as like that happening, but I have to imagine these same people have to have an answer for that, right? And I don't know what it is. As far as like hours of training and, you know, continual training, yeah, absolutely. You know, have refreshers, have these things that, you know, at certain pedestals or limit or at certain points in, you know, a law enforcement officer's career, yeah, go back, go get research. So like, just like us, we have to go to a school every time we get promoted, like E1 to E4, like it's kind of automatic. But the second you want to make sergeant or staff sergeant, sergeant first class, all the way up to sergeant major, you have to go to a new school. You have to get a school to be brushed up on what you're doing, what your job and your role in that new position is going to be. It could be very something similar to that. And hell, some agencies may have that. I don't know if it's, you know, if it's taken in with anybody, but something like that could really work. But again, it comes down to funding. A lot of agencies are already hurting right now because of what's been going on, you know, because of,
Didn't Mayor Garcetti like cut like over $100 million or something from LAPD?
he could have. I don't know, but
Greg, you pull it up.
But then you eliminate the ability to be able to do something like that, to establish, you know, this extra training. These here we go.
LA City Council slashes LAPD funding by $150 million.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is a example of defunding the police following all of the.
What was the date on that? July 1st. Yeah.
It's just, if you want better police, you need to build better systems to wean out bad police and better train the good ones. Mm-hmm. And I could see it your way too, with maybe not needing like a overseeing body that's going to be micromanaging, but just having a checks and balances in place to where if this department does get more funding for goals X, Y, and Z, like what are you guys doing with the money? Like, and then measure over time what the improvement rates are with how cops are like interacting with people. Because like you just said, in the military, you guys have that schooling that you have to go back to, and I can't 100% say if that's what the cops are already doing. Mm-hmm. But
I know
there's ways to improve it. I know they have to
take tests and they have to, you know, take exams and be selected for promotion, just like we are too. So like, you know, at some level, that sergeant with his stripes and an LAPD uniform had to get selected for that position.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting. You worked side by side with them during all of the events that have ensued in this year. Real quick though, because one thing I wanted to ask you, because this is really something that people talk about that our military is not treated well upon arrival back to the United States. Well, our veterans aren't treated well.
Yes.
So you kind of were countering that, saying, wait, there's so many opportunities that you just kind of have to position yourself to take advantage of.
Mm-hmm.
What was your personal experience? Like, how do you feel Uncle Sam took care of you?
So me and my wife talked about this actually kind of last night, like how it went getting out. Like the help is there. The problem is, and this is where you draw that fine line between making guys do something they don't want to, which could create more problems, like forcing them to go see a counselor. You can't make anybody do that. You know you need to have it, but you're not going to make them do it. So the help is there. A lot of the times it's the guy just not wanting to get the help. Like I didn't want to get the help. And then like the programs, because there's a difference between coming back from deployment and then getting out of the service, right? So like coming back from deployment, you have to go through all those things. That program, when you come back from a deployment, it's trash. It's absolutely trash, because you come back and you go through a couple things here and there. You go to that, like, I don't even think they do the Olympic Center anymore. And like a fucking month later, you're back on the range getting ready to go again. What? Like, I'm not telling you that I need like an insurmountable amount of time off, but I just spent 9 all the way up to 12, even 15 months away from my family. And you mean to tell me that I have to go back out and start training again within the first 2 weeks? That turns a lot of dudes off. Like, some guys are into it. Like, I didn't have such an issue with it, but like a lot of guys just got turned off by it. Like, bro, why are we doing this again? One, because it's our job. That's what we were hired for. But nobody just, like, it didn't seem we were being viewed as people, just soldiers just getting ready to go, which we are. But the Army now has gotten so much better about it, because now when you come back, you have to do these classes. You have to do these counselings. When you're getting ready to get out of the Army, dude, it's like a 3-month thing. And a lot of people, I remember when dudes were getting out, when I first joined, nobody knew how to do a damn resume. What the fuck's a resume? Because we didn't need one, because a lot of guys did like 18, 20 years and got out. That's all they knew. But now I got out 3 years ago, or in 2017, 3 years ago. And like, you have to do a resume. You have to do those things in order to exit that class, or they'll hold you up. They won't let you leave. So the military's been very proactive now. Back then, not so much, but they do have these things set up for you. And like the benefits afterwards, they're amazing, and rightfully so. And like, I can't, begin to thank everybody enough for their service, because like, I know what I've done, but like everybody else, it's just truly amazing. But like, they just have to want to have the help. And that's part of, people, or the Army, trying to coach that too. And they are now, because like, we have to go through like annual classes, like hunting the good stuff, right? Like, your life might seem bleak and black, or something bad happened in the unit, but you have to hunt the good stuff, like the riots, right? Like, that sucked. I had to go in on a Saturday night, and I was gone for 9 days, and that sucked. Dude beat the shit out of my face, but I had to hunt the good stuff, right? What was the good thing about it? Dudes made a good amount of money on it, because it was emergency active duty pay, and I got to meet a lot of good people. The guy at Mike's Deli down in LA donated over like 5,000 sandwiches to me and my guys, or $5,000 worth of sandwiches to me and my guys, to make sure we ate. But the silver lining to that is that there are still good people out there. So you have to be able to hunt that stuff in the dark times, because you could be on, I don't want to say death row, because that's pretty bleak. You could be going through part of your hardest time in your life, but there's still something there worth going out for, right? There's still a silver lining. When I came back from my second deployment, the divorce, it was tragic and it was upsetting, but I still had a silver lining, because I still had a job. I was still moving forward. Unfortunately, a lot of guys get out, and I'm sure you've heard of it, but 22 veterans a day commit suicide. I've had a lot of buddies that are unfortunately part of that statistic, and you could not find another veteran and say, you should have called me. Everybody's going to say that because everybody's willing to help each other out, but the individual has to be able to get help too. But sometimes it's just that they're so far gone. Unfortunately, 2 years ago, a couple of years ago, one of my buddies, Tyler Lotta, became one of those statistics, and you would have never known it because this guy, he was still in too. He was still in the Army. But he was funny. He was loving. The dude, he was one of my guys on my last deployment, but went off to do bigger and greater things. But, he was goofy. He was funny. Everybody loved being around him. We made fun of him here and there. Everybody, he's just a really good guy. And when we got word of that, it crushed a lot of us. We were like, man, we all wanted to just be able to talk to him one more time, to maybe even say, like, even, a couple of my buddies like, man, I was going to call him that night too. Something just didn't feel right, from the other side of the country.
Yeah.
So like, that's a real thing. So a lot of some of it does fall on like your own shoulders, your own individual shoulders. And, there's other ones here and other ones there, but that was a big one for me. And unfortunately, at that same time, I found out my sister a week before that had passed away from colon cancer. So like, it was just bottling up. And again, going into that dark space, but I had to hunt the good stuff. And my daughter was, 6 months, just turned 6 months. And when we got to Texas for Lotta's funeral, she took her first steps.
Yeah, that's amazing.
There's always something.
Yeah. Everything that you've been through to still hold that mindset, I think is so important for people to hear because, everyone's pain is relative and it's not always easy to be like, oh, well, someone over there has it worse because your pain, you are owning it, you are feeling it. But that is so powerful to hear just because you are looking for that silver lining, and you did go through after your second deployment some mental health struggles and battle with addiction and came out of it on the other side and are still holding those beliefs to be true that you need to look for that silver lining and stay positive with certain things.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people have issues with trying to get help because they think they haven't been through enough to go get help. Like, you listen to the stories I told, like I didn't tell you all my stories, but I told you some of them. I didn't feel like I needed help or I didn't deserve help. And I think that's a big thing too with a lot of guys is like, oh, I didn't see enough. I didn't see enough action. I didn't get enough firefight. I didn't do these things. And it doesn't really matter, man, because somebody else, your silver spoon is cake to somebody else. Like, so if you didn't get into a firefight or have these issues, man, somebody else had it worse. Talk to them, like get the help you need. Like, nobody's judging you because you didn't get into a firefight. Nobody's judging you because you didn't do something as badass as you think you did. Everybody has their own individual issues, right? So we just want us, like, especially the veterans, like, just talk to somebody, man. Like, we just found out, hell, I don't think we've gone, my unit, my old 2508, my battalion from my first 2 deployments, I don't think we've gone more than like 6 months without one of our guys committing suicide. And it's crazy because we're all so close. We all talk almost, we see each other on our Facebook groups and everything like that almost every day. But it still happens. I don't have the answer. But I know for me, talking to people, it helped immensely.
Just talking and being open, being vulnerable. And if there's one golden or silver lining in all of this, I think as we progress, maybe men don't have to feel to like be like that macho guy, like I don't need to talk to anyone. If you were maybe in the Army, let's say 30 years ago or whatever, and you just pointed out the fact of the matter is it's still an issue and people are still committing suicide at a higher rate.
Mm-hmm.
But just accepting the fact that you served your country and experienced things that most people don't, and they're going to have effects on you, and just being open and vulnerable and willing to talk to people. I mean, from your experience, it helped.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of it is again, the way we were raised in the Army. It's not the same way we were now. When it was kind of a weird transitional phase. So it was like, you know, if you seek mental help, you're weak. You know, that was like when I first joined. You know, couple deployments later, my first sergeant sat me down and was like, you need to go get some help. You know, because prior to that, you were judged as a weak individual. Now, we're trying to cultivate the environment that it's okay to get your help. Go get the help that you need. Go see whoever you need to see and talk to whoever you want to. Because that's so important nowadays. Because the individuals we are, because we didn't build the buildings with stone and bare hands and things like that. It's just because it's not who we are. It's not the way we were raised, right? But the mental health aspect of going to war and doing these manly things and doing these amazing things, it still comes with the stigma of like, you're a big brawly man. Like you don't need mental health. And I think it's always going to be there, but I think we're working towards the bright side of things on, you know, yeah, it's okay to get help. And I'll be the first one to tell you to go get help. You know,
do you have any resources off the top of your head, departments that helped you? For
veterans, it's the VA will start. The VA is kind of a pain in the butt, but once you get the ball rolling with them, they're really good. Military One Source for all active duty and veterans. The suicide hotline. They're all great resources. I've used the Military One Source for counseling, for marriage counseling with my ex-wife. That did a lot of good. But no, the counseling was great. But no, those are like the big three. You know, the VA One Source, and if you ever have any thoughts of suicide, just reach out to that hotline. I know buddies who've used it and said it's helped them immensely.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Get help if you've served. If you feel compromised in any way, there's resources for you.
Yeah.
And, dude, I really appreciate.
Yeah, of course, man.
You coming on and sharing your experience.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
I think a lot of people need to realize that there's guys and women like you out there that are truly serving our country, and all the time you had to spend away from your family and the sacrifices you had to make, the mental health struggles that you put yourself through, the things that you visually saw overseas.
Yeah. And
I mean, it's because you love your country, and people need to hear it from the source. That they don't need to hear it from the news. They need to tune in to people like yourself who can provide some of that background and insight. Yeah. And I'm really grateful that you were willing to share your story and come on.
Of course, man. I really appreciate the opportunity. And again, like, you know, these are my firsthand accounts. I didn't do anything crazy. I didn't win the Medal of Honor, but I just want people to understand that, like, not even military, everybody goes through something in life. You know, everybody has to have that in the back of their mind. Like, I have civilian friends now who didn't do the military, didn't do law enforcement, but I'm not going to judge them for it. You know, I'm not going to judge them for not doing that. And, you know, they respect me, I respect them, and I still love them the same, just as anybody else. Don't really know where I was going with that part.
No,
but yeah.
No. Like maybe that, like when they complain about certain things or their problems.
Yeah.
It's like, you're not being like, you don't know problems. You know, I was overseas and dealt with this, you know.
It doesn't matter. Everybody has issues.
Seek help if you need it. And that's just be a nice human.
Yeah.
And understand that there's soldiers out there that are kicking ass for you, and not all cops are bad.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, no one big group is bad. Don't, you know, there's going to be a few bad apples, man. There's going to be bad apples everywhere, but don't ever associate an organization, you know, based off one or two guys as a whole.
Let's keep moving in the right direction. And
yes.
I think you're doing that with your work outside of the military now, and you're in the what's it called?
National Guard.
National Guard.
Yep.
Sorry about that.
Yep.
All right. We're going to close it out now. With that being said, you guys, talking goes a long way. And we'll catch you next time.